I think we are going to begin the webinar. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second Vegan Finance webinar. We are delighted to welcome you. We saw in the chat that we have some participants who got up very early. So thank you for being with us this morning. And we have the feeling we have a round of the world Vegan Finance webinar. So before we begin the webinar, we are going to review the program. You can see it on the screen. We have two topics, update on the vegan market and investment in vegan plant-based market. And after the two topics, we will have a small digital coffee break. And after the coffee break, as you see, we will have three topics. First one focused on vegan private equity activities and entrepreneurship, the ethical, environmental, and economic returns of animal-free investments, and a topic focused on vegan funds and the performance of vegan funds in comparison with other major indices. If you have questions, of course, your questions are welcome. Maybe it's better to ask your questions at the end of the presentation, at the end of each presentation. And do not hesitate to put your question on the chat as well, because Vanessa can enable you to ask your question. A second important thing before we begin the webinar is to give a kind of refresher on the notion of veganism. Some of you attended last year's webinar, but I guess maybe some of you do not know exactly what veganism is. You can see on the webinar site, you have the webinar of last year, and there you can get the recording and the slides of Vegan Society, Louisa Waring, and she gives details relating to veganism. But I'm going to read the definition of Vegan Society so that everybody will know what veganism is, and I think it's very important. So for us, the Vegan Society, veganism is a philosophy and way of living which seeks to exclude, as far as is possible and practicable, all forms of exploitation of or cruelty to animals. So it means that you have to seek that for food, clothing, and any other purpose. And by extension, it promotes the development and use of animal-free alternatives for the benefit of animals, humans, and the environment. If you focus on what we call dietary terms, which means food, it denotes the practice of dispensing with all products derived wholly or partly from animals. So that's the complete definition of veganism. And as I told you, I rely on the definition given by Vegan Society. If you wish, as I told you before, you can have the recordings of last year relating to this definition. Vanessa, maybe you can show, or maybe you can send in the chat you're mute. So yes, you can maybe show on the site, or anyway, it's not difficult to find it. You when you enrolled, you saw the program, and at the top of your of the site you have webinar number 1, and there you can have the presentation of veganism.
I have shared the information on the chat, the link.
So is there any question relating to the definition of veganism, or is it fine for everybody before we go further? So it's an extensive definition, which means you cannot eat meat, fish, eggs, milk, honey. You cannot wear leather, wool, etc., silk, etc. You see, so it's a important thing. Now I underline the fact that it's a philosophy and way of living, so it goes far beyond food habits. Maybe as some of you know. Thank you, Estella. Thank you, Estella. So we are a bit early, so I don't know if you have questions before we begin with the first topic. No question. So David, maybe you can, well, it doesn't matter, we can be a bit early. We are going to see with David the update on the vegan market. So David is going to explain what he does, and is going to update the vegan market. And last year he did the presentation of this market, which is, as you see on the top of the program, very strong and more important. So David, you can begin your presentation now. It's fine.
Thank you very much for that, Veronique. And
yes. So Vanessa or David, you share your screen maybe.
I will do. So good morning. So thank you for those who have got up so early. It's absolutely amazing to see so many people here from all around the world. And my name is David Panel, or David Paniel, if I use my original French family name pronunciation. Now, I do have some slides, but I'm going to be jumping in and out of them. But let me start just by sharing my presentation here. So hopefully you can all see my lovely face on the screen in my presentation. I am the co-founder of two companies in the vegan sector that I run with my partner, Lisa, who you can see on your screen. And the first is our agency, Promote Vegan. And that helps companies understand the vegan marketplace and plant-based consumer buying behavior. And the second is Vegan Business Tribe. And that is a global vegan business community. And that just helps people grow a successful vegan business. I am also the host of a weekly Vegan Business Tribe podcast, which you can find on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your pods, to get a quick plug in for that. And also I am the UK agent for the Vegan Society's vegan trademark scheme. So we're very much involved in this sector. Veronique, could I just ask you to jump on mute? We're getting a little bit of banging noises there. Fantastic. Lovely. Okay, now I want to begin this look at the vegan market just with a quick run through of the latest statistics on the sector. And if you are looking for more statistics, then we were just talking about the Vegan Society and their definition of veganism. But the Vegan Society's website, that is the place to go if you want more statistics. They've got a whole vegan statistics section that collects together the latest reports and research from around the world, and that's got consumer behavior and it's got animal welfare statistics. So if you're looking for numbers to back up your pitch or presentation, then that is the place to go to find them. So where are we on our journey towards a vegan world? Well, first of all, no one really knows, because nobody's got an accurate figure of how many vegans there are in the world right now. And that's because the large-scale food and drink surveys, historically, they always tended to put veganism, vegetarianism, and other non-typical diets all together in the same category when they were doing their polling. So we need to wait for these big global food studies that only come around about once a decade. We need to wait for those to come around again, when hopefully they'll then separate out vegan diets in their results. And that'll give us a far clearer picture. But smaller studies carried out in the US and the UK by Ipsos Mori, they estimate that between 1 to 3% of the population currently identifies as vegan. Now, 1 to 3%, that is a lot of people globally. But it doesn't really make sense, does it? Because if only 1 to 3% of the population identifies as vegan, then how come the world's largest food brands and manufacturers are falling over themselves to bring out vegan products, and investors are investing so heavily in plant-based? It doesn't add up. And just to illustrate this, vegan meat brand Beyond Meat, they listed on the NASDAQ exchange with an IPO of $25 a share back in 2019. And that gave the company a valuation of $1.46 billion. But at the time, Beyond Meat was reporting a net loss of nearly $30 million a year. So how big is this marketplace, and why are investors getting so excited about it? Well, in 2021, Bloomberg estimated that the global plant-based alternatives market is currently worth over $30 billion. But that's set to increase to $162 billion by 2030. That's in less than 10 years' time from now. And that growth, it's being driven by visibility. Companies such as Beyond Meat, who we just looked at, Impossible Foods and Oatly, they've all entered into partnerships with established brands, which is putting meat and dairy alternatives squarely in front of the everyday consumer. So Impossible Meat, they recently partnered with America's largest grocery store chain, Kroger, on their own label plant-based burgers. Impossible Foods, they've partnered with McDonald's on the new plant range. And Oatly, well, they took center stage at the US Super Bowl when their CEO sang "Wow, no cow" in their halftime advert break. And that was viewed by millions of people. And these categories, they've doubled in size over the past 5 years. And that growth rate is huge. In 2019, nearly 1 in 4 products launched in the UK carried a vegan claim. And we've seen all the major food retailers launch their own in-house plant-based brands. And we're seeing this also with companies who you would expect would be the most anti-vegan brands that they were, such as Arla Foods, one of Europe's biggest manufacturers of milk and dairy products. They launched their own plant milk yogurt in 2020. And this is nothing new. Alpro was an early leader in the plant-based milk and dairy category, but they are wholly owned by French dairy manufacturer Danone. And that just shows a brilliant example of an organization using the distribution networks and deals with retailers that they already had in place to own that category before other companies could get a foothold. And those companies that haven't adapted, they've really felt the pressure. So in 2020, America's largest milk producer, Dean Foods, and they produced over 50 dairy brands, they filed for bankruptcy, followed quickly by Borden Dairy a couple of months later, who was another one of America's biggest dairy producers. And other major brands have been quick to explore the vegan marketplace in an attempt to disrupt themselves almost before they're disrupted by others. So Mars has been another huge one, Mars Confectionery. They've introduced a number of vegan products, including the Vegan Galaxy. We saw the launch of vegan Baby Bell and Boursin cheeses from Bell Brands. And with a lot of people joining us from Europe today, I'll just show you this one too. Even German Frankfurter giant Herta have moved towards promoting meat-free products to children, something that many people never thought they'd see a company like this do. Okay, so I'm just going to come out of my slides for a second here. Just back to myself. So this is all really interesting. And I think another milestone that we saw this year, and we'll look back on as a real milestone of a vegan market hitting the mainstream, was the opening of a fully vegan and meat-free QSR chain, or a fast food outlet. And when Burger King reopened its flagship London Leicester Square store, it opened it meat-free. Now, this was only a month-long trial, but Burger King, they've gone on record saying that they want their menu to be 50% meat-free by 2030. But again, this makes no sense because remember, only 1 to 3% of the population identify as vegan. So why are we seeing these companies making huge changes to their business models to cater for the vegan consumer? And the reason is they're not doing it for vegans. So in an interview with CNBC, Beyond Meat's founder, Ethan Brown, he said that their own customer research showed that 93% of the customers buying their Beyond Burger were meat eaters. Just take a moment to let that sink in. 93% of the people, so that's the vast majority of their customers who buy the world's best-selling plant-based burger, they're not vegan. They're not even vegetarian. They are meat eaters. And we've seen the same statistics in the UK with market research firm Kantar finding that 92% of vegan meals were eaten by non-vegans. And NPD, another research firm, they contradicted a similar study which showed that 90% of plant-based consumption in the US was by people who consumed animal products. And this is why you are seeing high street brands and food manufacturers almost falling over themselves to bring out plant-based products to the market. And this is why you're seeing car companies from Range Rover to Tesla offering vegan leather car interiors, and why even the most traditional brands, including Guinness beer, have removed isinglass, which is better known as fish bladders, from their fining process so they could make a vegan claim. The vast majority of people consuming vegan products and experiences and services, they're non-vegan. And that explains what's behind this explosive growth that we're seeing in the sector. And although this change in buying behavior was already well underway before COVID, the global pandemic, it supercharged that change. And the Vegan Society, they've done a lot of research into this. And their research, which was conducted during the pandemic in 2020, it showed that 1 in 5 UK consumers cut down on their meat consumption as a direct result of the pandemic, a direct result. And we saw the same link in Germany after a number of COVID outbreaks at meat processing factories led to 1/3 of people who were polled by YouGov saying that they too were planning to reduce their meat consumption because of the pandemic. And vegan charity Viva, they also ran a campaign at the time called 3 in 4. And that just highlighted that 3/4 of the world's new or emerging infectious diseases, they come from our commoditizing of animals. So the industry knows that consumers are actively looking to reduce the number of animal products that they consume or even give them up entirely. And we know that any change in consumer demand, that leaves established companies open to disruption. So how are companies responding to this new demand for plant-based and cruelty-free food? Well, this is a really important point to remember when converting people over to vegan products. You can only get a consumer to change one behavior at a time. Consumers don't want to change what they buy. They want to continue to buy the brands and the types of products that they've grown up with and are already familiar with. They just want these products to no longer be the result of animals dying, which is why vegan pizzas, vegan burgers, vegan chicken, vegan nuggets, plant milk, vegan cheese. These have all proven really convenient entry points into plant-based buying because we're giving people what they already know and they're already familiar with. And many other products, they've kind of quietly changed over to vegan so that their products just remain suitable for all, or they've submitted their products to the Vegan Society's vegan trademark just to prove to their customers that they've been externally audited. And if I can, let me just share this photo here. One second. Okay, I just wanted to share this photo if you can all see it, because I took this at my local Pizza Hut, fast food pizza place, because restaurant chains, they've been doing this too. They're swapping out their sides and their condiments without any fanfare so that they're suitable for vegans and everybody. So for dressings at Pizza Hut, the mayo, that's vegan too. The ranch dressing, that is vegan. I don't know if you can see on this photo, but in the top left, even the bacon bits in Pizza Hut's salad bar, they're now quietly labeled as vegan. And this is an important development because having two versions of a product or two SKUs, it's really expensive for companies. So if those two products can be replaced with a single version that is suitable for all, then that's a huge cost saver to that company. So why go to the expense of stocking a vegan and non-vegan mayo like Pizza Hut have got here? Just do one. Or a vegan and non-vegan brioche bun if the majority of consumers can't now tell the difference between the two. Which is, again, why these like-for-like products are the ones that are getting all the funding and investment at the moment. But now that people like Beyond Meat and Impossible, they've successfully replicated the taste and texture of beef burgers. And we've got hundreds of companies making plant-based sausages and plant milks. So companies are now looking to replace other animal products that historically have been harder to replicate. So let me show you this. This is Juicy Marbles, and Juicy Marbles is a Slovenian startup, and it was founded by two microbiologists, and they produce a vegan filet mignon steak, and they do it by layering soy protein into linear fibers. And when you look at it, it replicates that meat experience. It's a culinary experience. And on its first preview release, selling direct to consumers in the US, Juicy Marbles, they sold out in just 8 hours. They sold thousands of these vegan steaks at $40 a steak. An Israeli-based startup, Redefine Meats, they're doing the same thing in the food services industry. And they're using 3D scanning technology to produce a culinary-grade vegan steak that mimics the taste and texture of a whole-cut animal meat. And last year, that company raised $29 million to bring its products to the food service sector in Germany, Netherlands, and the UK. And a really important part of this is the speed at which these kind of companies are growing, because many people will look at a company like Beyond Meat and say, well, that's been an overnight success. But Beyond Meat, they're over a decade old. Oatly was founded in the 90s, and they'll soon be celebrating its 30th year. So they may have been founded before you were even born. These companies, they operated in relative obscurity for decades before finding success. But now, plant-based startups are receiving tens of millions of dollars in pre-launch backing as they look to replicate the success of these companies in just a fraction of that time. Okay, so I'll just take my slides off for a second, because what I want to say is it's this maturing of the markets which is opening up a lot of new opportunities. And we know that consumers are now happy to try plant-based alternatives. When I was speaking to the head buyer at UK supermarket chain Booths last year at the Plant-Based World Conference, he said, whenever they launch a new product in store, the very next day, they start to get emails asking if they're going to bring out a vegan version too. So while they're already selling multiple versions of vegan burgers and sausages, they're now going out there actively looking for manufacturers who can make other like-for-like vegan versions of secondary foods. So foods like seafood or caviar or pastries and pork pies and sweets and candies and things like that. Okay, so that gives us a quick tour of the headline statistics and the products which are largely based around the food diet, as you would expect. But for me, the really exciting opportunities in vegan and plant-based at the moment are when you move beyond these headline food products and just see what other developments are likely to break into the mainstream in the coming years. For example, the number of vegans in care homes has trebled in the last 5 years, but the understanding of veganism in care, it is hugely inadequate at the moment. As the percentage of the population who are removing animal-based foods from their diet increases, then the care and health sectors, they need help catering for these patients and residents. And so companies and services will be needed to meet that demand. An increasing amount of doctors and health professionals, they're becoming aware of the latest medical research that shows that a vegan diet, and especially a whole foods plant-based diet, if you've heard that term before, that can improve and even reverse many chronic health conditions, including diabetes and heart disease. But there aren't yet the referral gateways and pathways in place for patients to be prescribed a whole food plant-based diet. So we're going to have to do something about that. And then if you look at the other end of the population, we're starting to see an increase in vegan products and services aimed at children. And this is really set to explode. Recent research, again from the Vegan Society, shows that children are 50% more likely to be vegan than adults are. 50% more likely. And we talk about that 1 to 3% of the population identifying as vegan. But in 2021, BBC Good Food, they surveyed 1,000 children in the UK, aged between 5 to 16, I think it was. And they found that 8% of children said that they already followed a vegan diet. And a further 15% said that they would like to follow a vegan diet if they were in charge of their own food choices. That's huge. And that is a huge consumer base which are about to mature and about to get their own incomes to spend. And separate research carried out by Linda McCartney Foods also suggested that 70% of British children, they want more meat-free meals available on their school menus. So this is an opportunity that companies have been really slow to understand and capitalize on. And we've still not seen many major brands launch vegan products aimed specifically at children. Okay, let me just jump back into the slides here. So this is an example of one of them. So last year, Quorn was the first major company to bring out a children's vegan product. And they launched their Rawsome nuggets in the UK, which are vegan breaded nuggets shaped like dinosaurs. And they're aiming to replace chicken nuggets and turkey nuggets as well. And we've also seen Alpro. They've launched a range of growing up milk, which is aimed at toddlers and young children. And that's made from soya, but it's fortified with calcium and vitamin D. But as time passes, expect to see a lot more of this. But it's not just food. As with any interest that children have, there are huge opportunities for entertainment, for merchandising, and for education for vegan children. And we've got organisations like Vegan Kids who are hosting the UK's first weekend-long Vegan Kids Festival. We've seen a rise in vegan children celebrities. And the person on your screen at the moment is Omari McQueen, who at 12 years old, he already has his own vegan cooking show on the BBC's Children Network. And you can now buy vegan-themed books like Vivi the Super Vegan to read your vegan kids at night. And we've even got vegan-themed young adult fiction, such as the Earthlings trilogy by Ray Starr. And Viva la Vegan's children, their children's clothing, it proved so popular that they had to start producing it in adult sizes too. So what this tells us is when you're looking for vegan opportunities, it's not just the food. There's so much more going on in the market. But it's not just food for humans either. And the second biggest market for meat consumption is dogs and cats. It's the animals that live with us. And somebody who is looking to reduce their own consumption of meat, they may become increasingly uncomfortable that they're still buying animal-based pet food. And with new research showing that dogs and cats can thrive just as well on a plant-based diet as humans do, companies are now setting up both to meet this demand for pet food, but create it as well. And they range from companies such as Do Good, who you see here on the left, and they provide fresh kitchen cooked dog food. It was actually developed by a Michelin star chef, through to the pack, and they've replicated the traditional wet canned dog food. So what's really changed over the last few years is how many consumers now view veganism as something that is positive, even if they don't fully subscribe to a vegan diet themselves yet. And choosing a vegan option for many people, it's like making sure that you do your recycling or that you don't use disposable plastic bags for your shopping. It's a way of reducing your carbon footprint whilst at the same time reducing cruelty to animals. So this means a lot of people are now more open to trying activities related to veganism. Vegan cafes and restaurants report that a majority of their customers are non-vegan. We've seen an increase in vegan travel and leisure activities where consumers can have a wholly vegan experience from start to finish, not just the food they eat, but the trip as well, and how they spend their time when they're traveling. And this is an example. Air Safari's 269 is run by an ex-commercial airline pilot, JC de Klerk, and he's there in the bottom left. And he runs this in his home country of Namibia. And he allows travelers to see the beauty of Africa by light aircraft, whilst at the same time educating the country's lodgers and tourism industry on the need to adapt to vegan tourists. It combines travel with supporting the local community and sharing that vegan message. And another example, Vegan Adventure Holidays. I bet you didn't know we had so many vegan travel companies. We've got at least 5 or 6 as members at Vegan Business Tribe. This is run by Emma Fry, and they now offer vegan work and travel programs where entrepreneurs, they can relocate to countries such as Guatemala for a month and continue to work remotely whilst living on a vegan diet and being able to take part in local tours and activities. And more people are wanting to experience these kind of vegan experiences, even if they're not vegan themselves. Last year, Vegan Camp Out here in the UK, that was attended by over 12,000 people. The flagship O2 Arena in London, that's going fully vegan for the week-long tour of pop star Billie Eilish. And when Lisa and myself last stayed at our local vegan bed and breakfast, half of the people staying there with us, they were not vegan, but they just wanted to have a vegan experience for the weekend. Okay, just jumping back to myself for a second. So the entertainment industry is also another place starting to embrace veganism. And as most of us know, this started with some very hard-hitting documentaries, and that aimed to show people the realities of animal food production. But then we moved to some more indirect documentaries, such as The Game Changers, and that showed how athletes were improving their performance just by ditching animal products. Now, I know several companies now who are working on vegan, family-friendly entertainment shows. And because of the rise in vegan products and companies, we're also seeing an equal rise in vegan service companies to support them. So if you now have a vegan company, you can have your website designed by a vegan web design agency. You can have all the words written on that site by a vegan copywriting company. You can have a video on your homepage made by a vegan videography. And you can even have that website hosted by a vegan web hosting platform. And if you want to know how much tax you have to pay at the end of the year with this vegan business, you can even use a vegan accountancy company to work all that out for you. Because when most people turn vegan, they've already spent a lifetime building a career and developing a skill set. And they want to use those skills that they've already got to move the vegan scene forwards. And this is why over the past couple of years, we've seen vegan HR companies, human resource companies, and even well-populated vegan job boards for people who want to bring together their ethics with how they make a living. Our Vegan Business Tribe podcast, it's received over 15,000 downloads since it launched, and that supports people who are looking to grow a successful vegan business. Okay. Just to bring us to an end of this quick tour through the vegan sector, I wanted to take a final look at one part of the vegan market, which is still emerging at the moment, but it's not actually vegan, but it's going to have huge implications for it. So if I just jump back into my slides again. So over the last 10 years, 2 manufacturing processes have been developed that might actually mean that vegan alternatives get completely sidestepped by the majority of the population. One second. Is that an error message there? I think you can see my slides, but let me just share them again. Hopefully now you can see them. Okay, so these are technologies which might actually completely sidestep the need for people to move over to vegan food alternatives. And the first, which you'll see on your screen at the moment, this is precision fermented dairy. Now, precision fermentation, it's a process where dairy proteins, such as casein, are produced in a vat instead of inside an animal. And the result, it is identical to the milk that you will get from a cow, but without any animals used in that process. And several startups in Israel, Estonia, the UK and Germany as well, they're looking to commercialize and scale up this technology, which could be used to make anything that you currently make using milk, but there'll be absolutely no difference at all to that end product. It looks like cow's milk. It tastes like cow's milk. And if you look at it under a microscope or a spectrometer or something like that, it is biologically identical to cow's milk. And alongside this is another technology that you may have heard of, which is cellular or lab-grown meat. And this is a similar process where animal meat is cultured or grown in a manufacturing facility. But the end result, it's biologically identical to animal meat. In fact, it is meat. It's just grown outside of the animal. And in 2013, so that's quite a way now, quite a time ago now, Dutch scientist Mark Post, he ate the first cultivated meat burger live on television in 2013. Now, more than 100 companies are working on commercializing this technology and bringing cultured meat to the market. And over $1 billion of capital has been put into this industry in the last 12 months alone. Countries around the world have started the process of regulating for cultured meat for public consumption. And now many will not consider cultured meat to be vegan because it still needs cells taken from an animal to begin that process. It needs cells to culture. But one, that will likely change. And two, going back to our main theme of this presentation, this is a product which is not aimed at vegans. It's not aimed at the 1 to 3% of the population. This is a product that is aimed at meat eaters, and it will give them the exact same product they're consuming now, but without the need for animal agriculture being involved. It is the ultimate like for like product. Will it replace meat entirely? Potentially. Will it be a long-term solution, or will it just be a temporary bridge, a bit like vaping and e-cigarettes replacing smoking? We don't know. But venture funds and billionaires like Bill Gates and Richard Branson, they are investing heavily in this sector. And potentially, this technology has the potential to replace animal agriculture in a single generation. Okay, so that's it. That was a little bit of a quick whistle-stop tour around the vegan market. Just to repeat what I said at the start, my name is David Panel, or David Panel. And if you have a vegan business yourself, or just an idea for one, then you can contact me and connect with us at Vegan Business Tribe. And the URL is on screen there. That's veganbusinesstribe.com. And you can also find the Vegan Business Tribe podcast, and that is on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your pods. Or if you want to talk to us about consulting on the vegan marketplace for your company, you can also contact me through our consultancy agency, which is promotevegan.co, or david@promotevegan.co. So that is it. So I think we've possibly got a little bit of time now, if I just stop showing my slides, for some questions and answers. So I'm going to hand back to the team to just integrate that now. You're on mute there, Veronique.
So are there any questions? No? I have a question for you, David. The milk is from plants, I guess.
So that last milk that I showed there, no, it is not from plants. So it is precision fermented dairy. I'm not 100% sure where that process starts, but it is not plant milk. It is 100% mammalian cow's milk, but it is made without cows. So it is made in a large brewing vat. It's a very new technology. But yes, basically, if you was to swap that out on the supermarket shelves and not tell anybody, nobody would know the difference. It is the exact same process.
It means in the future, it might become completely vegan as meat, the same for, okay. So you take a cell from milk and then you grow it and then you can do milk.
You ferment it, yeah. So it's a slightly different process. It is linked a little bit to brewing and fermentation and things like that with alcohol. But yes, it's producing those proteins, those milk proteins like casein, which at the moment are only produced in mammals when they produce milk, but it is producing them in a vat or something like that. And yes, you know, when you're actually vegan yourself, you have to work out where you stand on these sorts of technologies, because there's still some animal involvement right at the start of the process, you know, and again, to get through testing with the FDA and things like that, it'll probably have to be tested on animals, but it may well easily wipe out the animal agriculture of dairy and things like that within a generation. So that can only be a positive.
If you try to suppress animal, you still try to replicate the taste of meat. So have you any example of new tastes which are not replicating meat or fish?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is where the vegan market is splitting at the moment. So to answer that properly, you have to understand consumers' buying behavior. So when somebody is right at the start of deciding that they want to look at their meat reduction, and that they want to start moving to a plant-based diet, they will probably happily walk into a QSR chain, something like one of the fast food chains like Burger King and McDonald's, and they will go and get that vegan burger because it's an easy entry point. It's replicating that meat, that meat kind of mouthfeel and texture and things like that. But as somebody moves along that journey, their buying behaviors change. And this is something that a lot of companies have been caught out by, that when somebody first turns to plant-based eating and a vegan diet, they might be very happy to walk into those kind of establishments. But 6 months later, they wouldn't want to be seen dead in there. So, that whole experience changes. And when you get to that point, actually consumers are not looking to replicate meat because it's been so long since they've eaten meat, and they still associate that texture and that taste with animals, that it can actually make them feel quite ill. And that's something that I find now. I will still go out and try those vegan burgers and things like that, just for my own industry knowledge. But it's a little bit of an unpleasant sensation the closer to meat they get. So a lot of people are now moving to different sorts of things as well, and even moving away from burgers entirely. So there's a real push now, and a lot of companies being very successful just by teaching people how to cook, teaching people how to look at things like jackfruit, sweet potatoes, things like this, other protein sources as well. And when you start to look at other protein sources, you can actually get things which are grown closer to a consumer, because a lot of the protein at the moment, it comes from soy and things like that. Now that's got quite a big impact because a lot of that grown in Central and South America. Whereas if you move to things like potato protein, and various different pea proteins, it may not sound as nice, but it actually is. And those sort of things can be grown very close to the consumer as well. So it's got less of an environmental impact. So yeah, a lot of companies are looking at this way as well. But I think the real future markets are going to be the like-for-like products, because that's going to be aimed at the huge consumer things. Someone's just put in the chat that I just want to read out about the fermenting process. Yeah, absolutely.
You have two questions in the chat.
Yeah, I was just going to read out what Claire Smith has put, because she actually knows a lot more about this marketplace than I do. And yes, so that precision fermented dairy, it is made via engineering yeast and using microbes for express a precise protein. So no cells are involved with that. So yeah, that can become a completely vegan process. And
you have another question from Coralie. Coralie saying, if you see people disengaging from, well, let me see the question. Do we see vegan consumers disengaging from meat-free, dairy-free options created by vegan companies and going to companies such as Erta and Danone?
Absolutely. So this comes into the ethics question of the marketplace. And again, before I go into that, I'll just re-emphasize that we know these companies are not making products for vegans. So we've worked with some of the QSR and fast food chains on their vegan offerings. And what you'll find in those companies is, so the people at the head of a company, especially if you go back a few years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, they didn't really understand the vegan market. They were saying, look, no vegans are ever going to come to our stores. No vegans are ever going to buy our products. We're people like Burger King and McDonald's. The vegan market isn't going to engage with us. And it took them a little bit of a while to realize actually that they weren't selling to the vegan customers. So that's one reason why they've moved into this so much. But what you find when you talk to these companies is within that company, quite often there is 1 or 2 people who are really pushing from change. So they might have started on the plant-based journey themselves, but they don't want to give up their careers. They've actually built a really successful career working at some of these, people like Burger King and McDonald's and things like that. But they understand the need to change. And so they're trying to drive that change from within. So I am never quick to, cancel or blacklist any meat production company who is moving towards the vegan marketplace. We know that getting somebody just to have a positive experience of plant-based food is the starting point for many vegans, possibly myself. If I go back 8 years ago to when I was just vegetarian, if it wasn't for these sort of burgers being available in the fast food places, I would have probably never started on that plant-based journey myself. So yes, there is an ethical stance, and people are perfectly legitimately taking that stance, and they may go and look at some of the purely vegan companies who are starting up in the marketplace, and I featured some of those in the presentation. But if we're going to change the world, it's these companies who are currently feeding the world. So we have to be engaged with these companies and we have to bring them on board. If we don't, and they don't change, then they will just go bust. And that's absolutely fine, as we've been seeing with some of the dairy manufacturers in the US. But, if we can engage these companies, get them to change, that's going to lead us to where we want to be all the more quicker.
Are there other questions? You can ask your question directly if you wish. We have a few minutes before our next topic. No other question? It seems so. So thank you very much, David. It was quite very interesting. I still have some questions, but I shall ask you. Oh, Estela, yes. Hello, Estela. Good morning.
Yes, good morning, David. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you. Very interesting. I have a question about the label. How these products, for example, are labeled in the supermarket? Because I don't see that the consumer is going to buy easily to sell like a sell meat. I think vegan is very complicated still, because I know that some people are not buying vegan products because I'm not vegan, so I'm not going to buy a vegan products, and they have their bias. But what about these products? I'm just curious, because I'm not working on that. I'm working more on vegan companies and vegan market. But what about this? I mean, are they, and we don't know anything about how the consumer are perceiving these kind of labels, right? Very interesting.
Absolutely. And this is going to be a lot of fun, if I'm being honest. We're really going to have to work all this out. Now, again, I'm like you. So I specialize in the vegan sector more than the cultured meat sector and things like that. But you have seen these companies starting to move away from the terms such as lab-grown meat and things like that. And that's laying the track a little bit, I think, for when they start commercializing these products. There are people who are a lot more knowledgeable in the sector than I am. And that's something that we're really going to be asking these people, saying, right, how do you actually market this to consumers? Do you even market it at all? There is lots of research showing how unhealthy animal products are. So is it a little bit of a case that we need the governments behind this, that we need legislation in the same way we have with vaping and e-cigarettes, just to move consumers over to it once it's been commercialized and once it's been regulated? So it might well be that the consumer at some point in the future doesn't have any choice. That pressure is just created by governments. But there is a lot of lobbying in the animal agriculture. People often say that plant-based food is too expensive, and it's not. It's just that meat is over-subsidized. So, it's not yet an even playing field. So don't expect these animal agricultural companies to just go quietly on this. It will be challenged in the courts, just as other plant-based things are. There will be a lot of legislation, that there'll be a lot of legal challenges. So we're going to see over the next 10 years how this plays out.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah,
brilliant question, though.
They cannot say plant-based because they were lying, and they cannot say grow meat because I think the consumer is not going to buy that, and sell. I mean, it's very complicated. So, but let's be very interesting to follow up. Thank you.
Thank you.
David, I have some questions on the chat, so we'll try to see them rapidly. I think first question you just answered partly. It's relating to the cost comparison between vegan products and non-vegan products with non-vegan products. And another question, has it been shown that lab grown are healthier than their true meat counterparts?
I don't know what the research on that is, but I will end that by saying it's a hell of a lot healthier for the animals.
And for the cost comparison, I guess you have already talked about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the moment, culturing meat and making things like that, it is a very expensive process, but it's not as expensive as it was, 5 years ago. Like I said, 100 companies are working, probably more now, are working on commercializing this technology. And when you've got that many brains looking at a problem like this, I am sure that we're going to start seeing this as a commercial solution soon.
Okay. I don't see other questions on the chat. If nobody has, if there is not any other question, maybe we can go on to next topic. David, thank you very much.
Thank you. I will say, if anybody who does want to follow up, go see us at Vegan Business Tribe, or just search for promotevegan.co, and you can contact me there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
Thank you for being today. So next topic will be focused on investment in plant-vegan activities, plant-based market, and we are welcoming Nandini. So we are very happy to welcome you today, Nandini. So I give you the floor.
Yes. Thank you, Veronique. And David, I really congratulate you. It was a very power-packed presentation. And I think I'll be more talking about what are the investment options, how exactly the forward and backward integration of the industry is going upon right now. We all understand that the vegan market is having a very impressive growth, and it is expected to show even stronger growth in the near future. But yeah, I think I'll be focusing more regarding what the investors should be thinking and doing as per the consumer's perception, and what are the investment options available right now for people like you and me. So yeah, I'll just try to share my screen once. If it is not possible, Veronica, I'll need your help with that. Just let me know if you're able to see my screen. Yeah. Hello. Yeah.
Yes. So maybe you can put it full screen. Display full screen. Yes. Okay.
Perfect. Yeah. So I think to start with, talking about from boosting a vegan market to animal-free financing. So I think, Veronica, in the very first of the presentation, you said that veganism has started as a philosophy. It's a way of living. David also confirmed that, yeah, it is a very, it is from being a philosophy, it is now a very societal trend and even a business trend now. We are witnessing an impressive growth in the global vegan market, and it expects even stronger growth in the years to come. It should not be forgotten that this vegan wave must support animal welfare, counter climate change, and contribute to the preservation of the environment. We can investors have a lot of interest, but then we cannot move away from the core perspective of whether they are or not, which is specifically related with animal welfare, counter climate change, and preservation of environment. From a specifically financial point of view, it is very important to question the specificities of vegan businesses and the various range of financing solutions that we have right now. And finally, I'll mainly be discussing about two main questions. Those are, what are the reasons for the attraction of investors to the vegan businesses? And what are the expected returns on the animal-free investments? Now, hello?
It's fine, we hear you, that's fine. That's good, we hear you.
Hello, I just wanted to...
Yes, it's good, we hear you. Yes, it's fine.
Like this only because I think there's some problem with the connection. Yeah. So yeah, as I was saying that as per our estimations, our baseline expectation for the growth of alternative protein market is assumed to be very consistent in the pattern with respect to the consumer expectation, regulatory support, technological change, and any changes in these assumptions affect the market, and mostly on the upside. Any further efforts on the part of scientists, startups, incumbent food companies, and investors will lead to the technological change and improve that. With all these positive factors, the alternative proteins can grow more quickly and up to around 22% of the market in 2035. Well, regardless of whether any of these alternative scenarios come to pass, substantial capital must be invested across the protein value chain to support the protein transformation. Since 2019, it has expected that the total investment, it jumped to around 540%. In the US alone, plant-based food companies were on the receiving end of a record of around 5 to 6 billion worth of investment, US dollars, in 2021, which was up by 60% over 2020. So increasingly, investors are seeing the success of companies such as Beyond Meat, Oatly, and they want a piece of the vegan pie. David mentioned a lot of companies, a lot of brands who have come up with new product launches or very recent developments. I'll not dig deep into that. But yes, I can say that the companies are very much interested in the vegan or plant-based products. However, the companies who want to attract the funds, now they need to show that the potential, that they are here and they have the potential to last. And that hanging on the coattails of this recent wave of animal welfare or sustainability or health and environment concerns, that won't be enough. They have to prove whatever they are talking about in terms of branding or marketing has to be converted on paper as well. So right now, I can say that the marketplace is very bullish when it comes to the plant-based companies. However, for individuals, for people like you and me, who want to put their money where their mouth is, the options are not always very obvious. Applying vegan principles, to say so, to the investments can involve a lot of research and will actually limit the number of companies you can invest in. Diversifying a portfolio, an investment portfolio, particularly for vegan investing, can be very difficult. It is possible, but very difficult for now. And so before going any further, I think we need to first understand the three key questions that is right now to be discussed. The number one point is that what exactly is plant-based or vegan investing? The second point is, how do investors get started? How exactly you can invest in such kind of vegan portfolios? And should plant-based investors expect to sacrifice investment performance? And this is a very common notion, because when you have an ideology attached to your money, usually people think that maybe the industry should do much better rather than the stock or the brand performing better for me or making money for me. So yeah, let's deep dive into the vegan investing ecosystem. So the very first question is that what exactly we mean by plant-based or vegan investing? So plant-based investing goes by many names. You might hear it called as vegan investing, humane investing, or cruelty-free investing. Now, what all of these approaches have in common is the intention to support plant-based industry as a as a means of transitioning from the practices that either harm animals or promote unsustainable animal agriculture. Now, plant-based investors necessarily does not mean that they will transform into a vegan diet. David very importantly pointed out a point that, out of the overall population, only 3% of the population are actually perceiving the vegan diet or vegan lifestyle. So yes, actually, when it comes to investing as well, that is the main point, that not diet or lifestyle. So we need to understand then what type of investors are we or are there in the market. So plant-based investors may do one or the more of the following products. So the number one point is that a plant-based investor will seek out investments in the business that offer plant-based products as well as plant-based alternatives to common the animal-based products. Number two, the investment, they will include the companies or the investments in the companies which involved animal slaughter, abuse, testing, and exploitation from any of the portfolios. The third kind of plant-based investor can be or will participate in the shareholder activism to spur positive changes in the companies regarding animal welfare. To discuss this further, when we say humane investment, we may invest in a retail company that, say, sells fur, but we would advocate for the changes in their practices so that they stop selling fur. Another example could be excluding any company that sells products affiliated with animal exploitation. So for example, any airline with leather seats on the planes will have a very little impact on the company's behavior. So the point that I'm trying to make is that since plant-based investing is still new, what each term means may vary among the various investment managers and the advisors, and hence it is very, very important to understand what kind of investor are we, or if you are talking from the brand's perspective, what kind of investors you want to attract. So I'm very sorry. Yeah, so having said this, let's discuss on exactly various investors can get started in the market. We understand that there are a lot of options available where you can put your money, you can help the industry to grow, to get into the another level. But how exactly you or me as common people can enter into this ecosystem and play our part, not just by shifting into a vegan diet or a vegan lifestyle, but actually contributing and growing the economy. So there are various factors to be discussed. So let's deep dive into it one by one. So the very first thing that we can understand is the pure play plant-based food stocks. Now, as with the development of the fossil-free divestment movement, clients' demand will be crucial to the development of plant-based or vegan investment strategy. Benefit from using a financial advisor to screen potential holdings based on vegan values and financial performance. As with the food industry, if we are just talking about specifically food and beverages segment, then investors interested in the plant-based food sector should look for the quality publicly listed stocks that are led by strong management teams and have the key ingredient for success are taste, price, and convenience. And that recipe for success applies to both individual companies and the plant-based food industry as a whole. So investors who are trying to raise funds plant-based egg, vegan seafood, snacks, dairy alternatives, and many will agree that there are still a lot of untapped areas, as David very rightly pointed out, that apart from food as well, there are other industries such as leather or cosmetics. So yeah, we can say that there are a lot of untapped areas, but as pointed out earlier, that it is very important to understand when you are investing in an industry, how the management is, how old the company is, if it is new, what exactly is the mission and vision. We cannot just go with the flow and go with the wave of the recent trend of plant-based, and we cannot just invest or put our money into the brands who are just trying to market their product as vegan or plant-based. The success has to move into the paper as well. It is also very important for the investors to actually move away from the processed food. We were actually discussing about lab-grown food or genetically modified food. So I think I would like to disagree with David a bit that, yes, of course, there is a revenue stream there, a new product launch there when it comes to a genetically modified food product or a lab-grown product. But from common notion, what I can feel is that right now, the money should be put upon the products which are less processed, because I think consumers have seen a lot of innovations already happening in the market, and just to get the vegan pie, just to attract more investment, more funds, and more profitability, maybe they are right now more interested in seeing what whole product can be there as per the nutritional value and not just the trend. So yeah, I can say that the newest wave of innovation in the plant-based ecosystem seems to be around clean labels with natural and easy to understand ingredients. And consumers are conceptually moving away from lab-based food to food-based food. So I think the question that Estella had, that whether the consumers are going to buy the product, if it is a cultured meat or a lab-grown meat, or what can be the labels for it. So I think, Estella, the answer to your question can be that the industry is still at a very, very niche stage, and how to label it, how to market it is still something that I think the manufacturers have not decided. It is the 150 companies who are working on the cultured meat, how to scale the product, how to make it commercialized. So I think there is a long way to go, and there are still a lot of opportunities in the conventional or the vegan plant-based ecosystem, as we say. So lab-based food is something that for now, as investors, maybe it will not be a very attractive segment, at least for 3 to 4 to 5 years. But yeah, you can never say never. So yeah, it is very important that the brands who use fun to improve their nutritional value, and rather than just focusing on scaling up the production. We have seen that the investments have gone high. The venture capitalists are very much interested in investing in the amount. But then the brands and the companies, they need to understand to improvise the product with respect to the nutrition, because there cannot be any trade-off with respect to taste, price, and the nutrition profile, and just launching new products, fresh products into the markets and just rebranding it will not work. Trust and transparency is very, very important. Having a product definition and credible labels for vegan and plant-based food can help build trust for both market actors and reduce confusion for the consumers. Additionally, communication and marketing should be honest and realistic without exaggerating or sugarcoating the fact. I'm sorry.
Nandini, could you share your screen again, or is it a problem of connection?
So Veronica, actually, whenever I'm sharing this,
yeah, you know your slide because we cannot see it anymore. So maybe you have some problem of connection. So you think you can share it again?
Yes, just give me a moment.
So Vanessa, maybe you, if you can get the slides of Nandini, maybe it will be easier.
Yes, actually, Veronica, the issue is that whenever I'm trying to share my screen, my system.
You can send your slides to Vanessa. Maybe it will share for you.
Yeah, it's already being sent, Vanessa. Could you please check?
So sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, no problem. So yeah, as I was saying that the marketing branding is very much important. Sugarcoating the facts will not work, and plant-based or vegan is important, but we cannot operate in the vegan vacuum. We do have to consider what the product taste is, what the pricing is, and what the nutritional profile is. And as a company, the core will be whether your products replicate or improve upon the taste, cookability, cost, and nutrition of the product they seek to display. So these 3-4 factors will be very, very important when the investors are listing the companies to invest. The second important point will be the plant-based food ETFs. So taking a position in an exchange traded fund, ETF, is a great option for the investors who don't want to go all in one company or aren't interested in picking specific stocks. ETFs provide broad-based exposure to a sector while mitigating the risk of holding shares in a single company. A few vegan ETFs which have been very famous and are available includes Beyond Investing's US Vegan Climate ETF, the VanEck Future of Food ETF, and VegTech Plant-Based Innovation and Climate ETF. So these ETFs exclude companies engaged in animal exploitation, defense, human rights abuses, fossil fuel extraction, and energy production, and also the other environmental damaging activities. It includes mid-cap stocks that replace the companies in sectors that became underweight through their exclusions. And it demonstrates that it is possible to obtain broad-based market exposure while adhering to the animal and environmental friendly principles. So I'm sure in the later part of the conference, we will be getting to know that which are the best ETFs to work upon. But yeah, these are some of the ETFs which have amazing moral responsibility, where they exclude the companies who are abusing the human rights, animal rights, or even the fossil fuel extraction or controlling the energy production. So I think these are the ETFs which investors, companies, people like you and me can look into. And the third section, which I think is very, very important, is to use shareholders' power. Now, shareholder activism is already making a very visible impact on the American food industry. There are a lot of examples where the power of shareholders was being seen. A very good example was back in 2018, when the New York state pension fund, which owned at least around $344 million US dollars worth of share in McDonald's, made a headline when the comptroller, Mr. Thomas DiNapoli, wrote a letter to McDonald's imploring that the fast food giant need to adopt to be a more human chicken welfare policy. Groups like Human Society charge that chicken from McDonald's and other fast food companies are bred to grow at a very unnatural pace and live in overcrowded conditions. And since that, Burger King, Aramark, Kraft Heinz, and Subway, all these big companies, they have pledged to give chicken more floor space by 2024. And McDonald's is considered the laggard in the industry. So to support change within the companies, voting during the upcoming proxy season for resolutions demanding plant-based food products, and at the end of animal abuse and exploitation, is a gradual but promising strategy. So the meaning is that when we are investing, we are kind of becoming a part of shareholders. We have a say in how the environment can be handled, how the animal throughout the process can be handled. And I think when you're investing, it's not just about the money. You are also being a part of the gradual change, and it will be a very, very promising strategy for the near future. Another very important and attractive aspect, maybe purely from the point of view of investing money, is the IPOs, the rise of the vegan IPOs. Now, along with a rising number of vegan stock indexes, vegan companies increasingly turn into publicly traded companies, either by directly being listed at different stock exchanges or by going through a special purpose acquisition company, which we call as SPAC. In 2021, more vegan companies announced to prepare for an IPO than ever before. And at the same time, the list of the public listing being conducted is growing. In terms of new vegan stock, plant-based dairy brand, the Planting Hope Company, producer of world's first commercially available sesame milk, recently completed its IPO in Canada and selling around 22.5 million shares at a price of just $0.4 each. And following the Planting Hope's public listing, the vegan dairy manufacturer is joining two major brands, actually, mostly from the plant-based alternative sector, including the world's first publicly listed US brand company, Beyond Meat, and the cardigan big player, the Very Good Food Company. So these are the two brands who have been listed for such kind of IPOs. Please excuse me with my voice. Actually, it's a bit broken. Yeah. So moving forward, another vegan giant entering the vegan stock market is the Swedish oat pioneer Oatly, and its innovative and global hyped oat milk is actually gaining traction after securing around $2 billion IPO. Now the publicly owned oat milk company will be furthering its growth in the fast growing market, and with the alternative protein outperforming both the milk and the soy milk. So apart from the stocks and the IPOs, the people can also invest in the food supply chain companies, the food and grocery giants. The shift from the meatless option has promoted food industry giants like Kellogg, major grocery store chains like Kroger, to heavily expand their plant-based offerings. Kellogg Company, it increased its portfolio in 2019, and the company's Morningstar Farms brand introduced a line called as Incognito, featuring all the vegan burgers. In 2020, Kroger added around 50 plant-based products to its Simple Truth brand, including non-dairy cheese, oat milk ice creams, and a plant-based alternative to chicken. Its product line already features meatless burger patties, sausages, non-dairy source cream, etc. In 2022, Kroger announced an innovation partnership with privately held Impossible Foods to develop more plant-based food products. Should the plant-based investors expect to sacrifice investment performance, which is a very generic notion? So from my perspective, a strategy can be developed that either protects or increase one's assets depending on the mix of holdings. While no investment has guaranteed returns, there is growing momentum to support the wisdom of building a plant-based investment strategy. Organizations that have joined the FAIRR initiative, now representing around 4.1 trillion of assets, acknowledging the risk associated with the factory farming, and from environmental damage to public health issues. Not staying on the top of the plant-based protein shift is not just a lapse of moral judgment, but is actually a financial risk as well. Investors with strong convictions can still perform in alignment with the broader market. In fact, investing using ESG ratings or the stocks or the indexes have been shown to reduce a risk and offer financial advantages. Plant-based investing could result in a significantly smaller carbon footprint, while avoiding the risk associated with animal production, all benefit that we expect from more and more companies. So all in all, I can say that the industry is actually prepared for investors like you and me to put our money into it and actually be a part of the vegan economy. And I'm really sorry I have to wrap it up fast because of my voice, but I'll be ready for any of the questions that you guys will be having. Yeah.
Thank you, Nandini. I hope your voice is going to.
Yeah. I'm really sorry about that. Yeah.
Oh, it's a question of weather and I guess conditioning. Do you have questions for Nandini? Some questions relating to the investment possibilities, and as you see, it's quite difficult to know how to invest, where to invest. Well, all the more if you are really if you want to make sure you have a vegan investment, which is not so easy. So no question. Nobody. I don't see any question on the chat. So maybe we can have the break now. So the break will be for 10 minutes, and after the break, we will have 3 topics. The first topic with Sebastiano Castiglio.
There is Milan with a hand up.
Oh, okay. So I didn't see. Sorry, Milan.
Yeah, hi Nandini. Actually,
Yes,
such a nice presentation. So I have one specific question regarding Indian market. I think you could answer or not, but I have question. How could you see the Indian market in particularly vegan or vegan meat only? How could you see after 2030 or 2035? How could you see the market?
Okay.
Thank you.
So Milan, yeah, I hope you are asking about the overall industry and not from the investors' point of view. So when I say industry, the Indian market will actually, for the overall plant-based ecosystem, it is actually going to have a growth rate of around 35% for the next 5 to 10 years. If I just talk about plant-based meat, then to be honest, the opportunities are a bit less. But when we talk about plant-based milk or the counter food products, then the opportunities are more. One very, very interesting fact to know about Indian market is that the investors or the brands or the companies who are coming into the Indian market, they are mostly focusing upon the indigenous resources such as millet. The governments, they are doing a lot of efforts. They are providing a lot of incentives to the Indian brands or the companies who are coming up with the products from the indigenous raw materials. So I think the market is great. Of course, for a market like India, providing a beef or a pork alternative will not work. India being a key manufacturer, producer, and consumer of milk will take a bit of time to digest the dairy alternatives. But if you are coming into the market with the indigenous raw materials such as millet or bajra or jowar, as we say, then you'll also get the support from the consumers as well as the government. I think recently the government announced that they will be helping government of Assam to export millets or to process the millets as well. So yeah, I think the industry has great expectations. The growth rates on the charts are fantabulous for the Indian market. But yeah, you have to carefully choose for which kind of plant-based product we are talking about. So of course, a replacement of beef, pork will not work. Chicken will be fine, but mostly if we come up with plant-based snacks, that will be something which will be a golden opportunity for the brands in the Indian market.
Do you have other questions? No other question I see on the chat. So we are going to have a small break. Which is a digital break, of course. It ends at 11:30, and so after the break, Sebastiano will present his activities. Good morning, Sebastiano. I see.
Good morning, everyone.
Yes.
Pleasure to be here.
Thank you, and thank you, Nandini, for your presentation. And
thank you, Veronica. Thank you, everyone. And I actually represent Future Market Insights, and I am a consultant of food and beverages, specifically working for organic, plant-based, and vegan foods. So we do such kind of research for almost a decade now. We are doing it. We are tracking the market for almost a decade now. So if you guys have any questions, any queries regarding the investment or even the market scenario, you can definitely reach out to me via my company's website. Thank you very much. Thank you, Veronica.
So let's come back to the webinar at 11:30. Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we are going to go on with the webinar after this very small break. Sebastiano is going to maybe present his activity. So I let you do that, Sebastiano, and talk about vegan private equity, entrepreneurship, as you wish.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone. And thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to speak to an audience that is well-versed in numbers, finance, and economics. I define myself as a vegan investor and activist. Investor because I invest through different structures, directly or partnerships or funds and others, mostly in the sector of replacing animals in all human activities. And I define myself as an activist because I have been an activist for animal rights since the age of 15. And that's the guiding force behind my activities as an investor as well. As an investor, I'm a partner in different structures. Maybe most notable, in 2020, we launched the first SPAC with the aim of replacing animals and taking them out of the supply chain, and we successfully raised 230 million in an IPO on NASDAQ. Going to the subject matter, okay, I guess the question on everyone's mind is why and how does it make sense to invest in, let's say, vegan finance? Okay, what is vegan finance? Basically, the point is, we can observe the world and try to anticipate major trends. Okay, for instance, we all know that the trend of over-consuming oil is not sustainable, neither in the short term nor in the long term, for environmental reasons, obviously, but also because oil is a finite resource that is going to be exhausted. And then nowadays, we tend to look at the pros and cons of every resource use that we make. So, coal might be efficient when there's a war between Russia and Ukraine, but the cost of it in terms of public health and environmental health is unsustainable, again. So when it comes to vegan finance, what we're looking at is what are the major trends that the world is facing? Food is obviously a key issue. Food security is a key issue. And what we try to do when we invest in alternatives to the current food system is to identify what future trends may be and how they serve a vision of the world that goes a little further than the short-term vision that is informed the food world until now. So let me share a couple of slides with you just to put this in perspective, because it is fundamental to do so. And please tell me if you can see the slides.
Yes.
Wonderful. So this is a chart that shows, you see the whole planet Earth, which is mostly water, as we know. Habitable land is about 30% of the whole surface of land on the planet. And agriculture takes about half of all habitable land. What is shocking is that of all arable land used for agriculture around the world, 78% is used for animal feed or pastures, okay? So put this in focus. Imagine of all agricultural land in the world, 78% is dedicated to feeding animals. And 22% is everything else, including biofuels. So not only human food, but also biofuels, which obviously play a big role in other issues. Now, of all the production of these agricultural land, animals provide only 18% of all calories consumed by the planet. And that little 22% of agricultural land, that includes biofuels as well, provides 82% of all calories consumed. So now put this in perspective and think that this is the situation now with the population that we have right now, okay? And think of what happens when the population increases if this is the model, okay? Obviously, basing our food supply on animals is completely inefficient, as you can see. And as the population grows, it will be even more inefficient. Actually, it will bring the world on the verge of crisis, okay? There's one other very important thing that I would like to underline. These days in the news, everybody hears about the Russian invasion of Ukraine as an element of destabilization of the entire food system, food crisis, famine. There are 50 countries that rely on Ukraine for their food supplies. This disrupts the entire food supply of the world. Now, let's look at the numbers again. And you're the right audience to think of numbers. The official figure is that the Russia-Ukraine war is creating a gap of 12% of all calories traded, not consumed, traded, okay? So imagine of, all the calories that the world uses, most are consumed by the countries that produce them themselves, okay? 12% of the calories that are traded between countries are in a crisis. So if I think that, if you think that agricultural land at 78% is used to produce calories for animals, then you immediately understand that this 12% of calories traded is a ridiculous amount compared to what is wasted feeding animals. So a calculation that I heard recently, and I haven't had the time to sit down and verify it myself. Okay, I guess you all know that cows eat a mix of grass and grains and this and that, but pigs and chicken only eat grains. They don't eat grass, okay? So the entire food crisis caused by Russia and Ukraine amounts to 5% of the amount of grains that we feed to pigs and chicken. Now figure that out. It means that if everyone on the planet reduce their consumption of eggs, chicken, and pork, as it's called, they call it pig's cadaver meat. If everyone reduced their consumption 5%, there would be no food crisis. I don't know if it's clear enough that we're dealing with a crisis that comes from other sources. This war is nothing compared to how the world is wasting food. So let's look at something else. Let's look at the inefficiency of food production through animals versus plant-based. You see the numbers in this slide, but if you think that it takes 3,800 grams of protein fed to a cow to produce 100 grams of protein, you obviously understand how insane this is. It's as if I came to you and said, I had a great idea for a new company. I take 38 brand new cars, I break them all down. At the end of the process, I give you one car, which, by the way, if you drive it, you'll get sick, as you do if you eat meat. And of the rest of all this, everything is waste. And by the way, you'll deal with it, or we'll find some public supplies to deal with the waste. But imagine if anyone came to you and said that. That's why I'm upset when people talk to me about food waste. 1/3 of all the food in the world is wasted. Well, let's think about the fact that we waste, we feed 100 calories to a cow to obtain 1 calorie of edible meat. So let's think about that. Let's think that we waste 99 times the amount of food we consume when we consume meat. Okay, we waste 99 times the amount of food that we consume. So when 1/3 of food available is wasted, it makes me laugh. Compare that to 99 times the food that's consumed around the world. And one key aspect that you have to consider is also the use of water. And I'm going to share with you another chart that is pretty enlightening from this point of view. So anyone and everyone can have their point of view about if food based on animals should be consumed or produced or not, and what this means for the world and the planet. But one fact is very clear, and it's inescapable. There is not enough fresh water to continue producing food through animals. This is based on data, mostly on research made by McKinsey, but confirmed by United Nations and the World Economic Forum and everybody else. There's complete agreement on this, okay? Look at the situation in 2020, when we already started using non-renewable water for agricultural use. Jump to 2030, and by the way, everyone around the planet these days is affected or is talking about the drought, okay? How much water is available? Ooh, turn off the water while you're brushing your teeth and other stupidities like that. So look at the situation in 2030. In 2030, the gap between available water, including non-renewable reserves, and the use, if the use were the same as today, is about 40%. So we will be missing 2,000 billion cubic meters of water from what we need for our uses, everything. People, normal consumption, industrial consumption, and agriculture. Let's go back here. Look at how much water I need to produce 100 grams of protein through a cow, 1,646 liters. And look at how much water I need to produce 100 grams of protein via plants. It's 7 liters. What does this make you think? What is the most efficient system to provide food for the entire planet when we are facing such a crisis? So what I want to point to is that the reason why I'm investing in alternatives to food produced through animals is because not only do I think it's the right thing to do, but it's indispensable. If someone gave you a perfect calendar and timer and told you, I know exactly what day and what time we will run out of oil, that date is clear, and we need to work on the alternatives because otherwise we won't be able to supply energy to the world. Big debate about when oil is going to end, but projections say, there's enough until 2050, maybe beyond, and this and that. With food, absolutely not. By 2030, we're already in total global crisis unless we change the food system and start moving away from wasting resources producing food through animals and start producing food in alternative ways. So what I invest in, and I have invested in this for almost 20 years, is these alternatives. And these alternatives come in different forms. As you may know, there's plant-based production that basically turns vegetables and plants and grains and legumes into edible food in different forms, sometimes replicating meat, sometimes doing other things. And then there are two other major routes that are being explored to face this crisis. And one is so-called cell-based meat or other foods, where animal cells are taken through biopsies and then reproduced and grown as you do when you do cell cultures, and then you produce meat with these cells. The technology is maybe promising, very far away from being on the shelves. Most optimistic forecasts say it will take 10 to 15 years before viable products and affordable products are on the shelves. If you think back of the chart on water, by 2030, we're already dead. There's not enough food. So that's not the solution. Then this fermentation. Fermentation is the process that is used to produce beer and wine. And it's also the basic process behind the existence of bread and other foods that we're very familiar with. probably many of you are not familiar with the fact that, for instance, rennet, the ingredient that is used to coagulate milk and make it into cheese. Now, for well over a decade, that's been produced through fermentation. It's not extracted from animals as it used to be. So 97% of all cheese produced industrially, the cheese you find in supermarkets, contains an ingredient that is produced through fermentation. So fermentation allows you to, in stainless steel tanks, using microorganisms to turn basic starch into something else. So several companies, which are very promising, are turning the starch into proteins or other more nutritious starches and other food products. And it's quite efficient because it uses a lot less resources than even agriculture. Because you turn, in the best and most promising situation, you turn 1,000 kilos of sugar that you feed to microorganisms into 150 or more kilos of protein, which of course is enormously more nutritious and fundamental than sugar. So there are many strategies out there. But what is important is, as we're talking about finance, if I see a crisis that needs a solution, if I see a trend that is very obvious, and if I see a very clear timetable about when solutions need to be available to resolve a crisis, then I'm wise if I invest in those solutions and think of the future in that perspective, and I'm ready with the alternatives that will be needed. So that is the general perspective that I adopt in my investments, and I'm looking for and investing in solutions to this major problem. And the calendar is clearly there, the timeline is there, the clock is ticking. And in my view, anyone who's not investing in this and is not considering this as a primary, very important field into which one should invest is making a mistake. And I will be happy to answer your questions now if you have any. And obviously, I believe that especially young people should think of this and as a primary focus for the future. There's very little as important as feeding the planet. The population is growing. The problems are very visible and the timeline is clear, and the solutions are also pretty clear. We need to stop wasting resources in a food system that is completely absurd and invest in a food system that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastiano. Do you have questions? I'm just checking the chat. Are there any questions? So far, no question. Sebastiano, I have a question myself because you focused on well, you explained what happens with water and well, the big problem we face. So how long you have talked about cells, so the time it will take for that, but how long do you think it will take for people to be aware of the problem? Because even after COVID, we thought that people might change their behavior. And in fact, as for instance, one thing they did after confinement is just to take, to go in the open and to eat meat, etc. So barbecue, etc. So I mean, it didn't change. So how long can it take, and how can you see the way we can spur the change? In fact, so
very good question. I'll tell you what my perspective is. Okay, let's take another example. Again, let's think about the way people move. We all know that oil is unsustainable, that it pollutes, that it creates climate change. It is a problem. People are still driving cars. and taking planes and consuming gas as if there's no tomorrow. And, so the habits are not changing. But sometimes it happens that, oops, there's a supply issue. So people are thinking, what are we going to do this winter when we don't have gas to burn because of the Russian-Ukraine war? And how is that going to affect oil? And we've already seen the price of oil jumping. And will that be affordable? Will I be able to fill my car? So when people face a crisis, they start realizing, oh, something is wrong. Now, the industry itself is thinking about this. Major food companies, and think about it, 9 out of the 10 major producers of meat in the world are investors in alternative proteins, which tells you a lot. But major food companies have launched and are exploring and are experimenting with plant-based alternatives to everything that they do. So what's going to happen, in my opinion, is not a major shift in how people behave and what they eat. And it's certainly not going to be a big political push. Look at how inept the entire political world is about climate change. Blah, 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 nothing ever happens. Not a single change, because politicians are corrupt by nature. So lobbies and money dictate regulations, not the world's needs. So what's going to happen is, very simply, there will be a food crisis. Food companies are already aware of what is happening, and they see the price of ingredients rising. And what is going to happen is that plant-based ingredients and fermentation ingredients will be less expensive than animal-based ingredients. Therefore, the food industry will replace these foods based on animals with foods based on plant. Think about consumption of alternative milks, plant-based milks. That amounts to about 15% of all consumption, for instance, in the US. Do you think that's because people want to eat or drink something healthier? Maybe, but the main reason behind that is that to the food company, it costs a fraction to produce plant-based milk than it costs to sell animal-based milk, period. And that is why these products are being pushed, and they're growing, and they're on the shelves. Plant-based meat, not the same story. So far, the largest companies have done very little, and it still costs them more than it costs to put meat on the shelves, because of all the subsidies and how distorted the industry and the whole economy of food is. But it will happen at some point because of lack of resources. So what's going to happen is not people changing their habits, it's not nations and governments making the right choice. Very simply, the cost of alternative ingredients will be lower. That's what the food industry will put on the shelves.
I think I don't see any question in the chat, but I have another question, because when we talk about veganism, some people argue that it's also having a carbon footprint. Can you tell us more about that aspect? Switching, so in not only in food industry, but maybe in other industries such as leather, vegan leather, etc. So what do you think?
Can you tell me the question again? You're asking about.
The question is well, in fact, when you say you want to switch to veganism, for instance, meat, vegan leather, etc. Some people tell you, well, it's going to increase carbon footprint because you have pollution. Now I know you have.
But that is ridiculous. If you think that we were looking at the chart before about the use of land. Imagine if tomorrow morning you switch to pure plant-based food production. You would need less than 1/3 of the land that's currently cultivated. Everything else could be turned into forest. You wouldn't have an issue of climate change and emissions ever again. And it's obvious that switching, but there are innumerable studies that show this. And studies, by the way, by FAO, the United Nations, and several others that show this, that a switch to plant-based nutrition would be beneficial in every way for the use of resources, but especially in terms of emissions. There's no question about it. Anyone who disputes that has not read the data.
And there is another aspect. You talked about the waste of food and resources, but there is a waste of animals, because basically, for instance, if you want to have milk, you have the babies of cows, they can be killed or whatever. You have overproduction of animals, and a lot of them are just killed for nothing. So
yeah. Well, again, put it in perspective. We claim to struggle to feed about 8 billion people around the world. And every day we feed 80 billion animals. Mm-hmm. Obviously, something can be done about that. And again, if you think of how many resources go into feeding animals, and of course, not every grain fed to animal and not every food fed to animal could be directly fed to humans, but it's all grown on land. So you can grow something else instead of growing animal feed. You can't feed alfalfa to humans, but you could grow soy instead of alfalfa, and there you go. Then you would have an incredibly nutritious crop. Mm-hmm. It's a matter of choice. But as in many other fields of human activity, lobbies are investing infinite amounts to keep the status quo. You know that meat and dairy companies would be bankrupt tomorrow if it were not for the public subsidies they receive. They would be bankrupt tomorrow. This is very important to know for people studying economics and finance. A company that is not viable unless it receives massive amounts of public subsidies and grants, is that a viable company? Is that a viable activity? I don't think so. So again, we need to focus on the alternatives, and we need to focus on better ways to feed the world.
So you put your finger on, for instance, what the European community does, because you know that agri-food industry is a very sensitive activity, so they support the activity. So it means that it's necessary not only to change the behavior of persons, but also to make awareness at a higher level. I mean, among governments.
I don't believe it. I think everyone is aware, but everyone is corrupt. If you're a politician and a lobbyist comes and says, I'm going to give you millions to support your re-election campaign, this and that, and as a politician, they all do that. They take the money and then vote according to how they're financed. It's pure corruption. Unfortunately, that nobody cares about the public interest, or very few, let's say.
I have a question of Bandin relating to your portfolio of investment. Could you share information relating to your different investments?
Well, I have so far in my investment career in this sector invested in almost 100 different companies that try to remove animals from the food supply chain, but the supply chain in general. And I was one of the early investors in Beyond Meat, but I have invested in companies of all size and nature. Obviously, always choosing the ones that I think are best at what they do. And so I take it from the angle of obviously supplying better food that is healthy and nutritious and can satisfy consumers' demand, but also I believe that the most important aspect here is not to make vegans and vegetarians happy, but it is to make meat eaters happy with replacements. Therefore, I focus on replacements for animal-based products that actually work, that actually have the right nutritional profile and have the right texture and taste and pleasure factors attached. That's how you successfully replace one food with another.
You have talked about suppliers. So I was wondering how you can control supplier chain, because when you invest, you invest in a project or a product, so you know it's vegan, but I guess you need to do backup control to see if upstream it's okay.
Yeah, of course, that's done. We conduct very strict due diligence on every company that we consider and we invest in, and we're very selective. So absolutely, you need to check everything.
Maybe one last question, since I am, I am finance. How do you consider the returns? Because it's the question that we have, and it will be the topic for the next presentation.
Mm-hmm. Of course, I think that I can speak for my own experience and my own work, and returns on investment in this sector have been fantastic. I have historically had returns of over 40x on my investments over the years in this sector. Obviously, everyone is looking at the poor performance of the only two stocks, public stocks in plant-based, Beyond Meat and Oatly, but they have nothing to do with a general situation, which is, again, there's a food supply chain that doesn't work, that needs to be replaced and needs to be fundamentally changed. Alternatives are necessary. And what we need to do is invest in the smart alternatives, smart companies, and smart players in the field. And there's no doubt in my mind that these are necessary changes. So whether it's one company or 1,000 and which ones are successful, obviously that's up to us as individual investors to identify and figure out.
You have a question from Tim. We would like to know if you can share the list of your.
No, I can't. Obviously not. But if you want to see part of that, I'm one of the partners in Blue Horizon, based in Switzerland, which is one of the largest investors in alternatives to animals in the world. And those are all companies that I invested in through Blue Horizon. That's as much as I can share.
So Blue Horizon, we had them as keynote speakers last year. Robert Borer. So on the webinar site, you can see the presentation. The presentation of Blue Horizon. Now you don't have the slides because I think they were from Bain. They were a presentation of plant-based market prospects. But anyhow, you have some information relating to Blue Horizon. Otherwise, Sebastiano, anyway, you on LinkedIn or on social networks, everybody can see your. You have some companies which are advertised.
Absolutely.
Other questions, or is it fine? And we can go to. Oh, let me see. I have another message. So. We thank you very much, Sebastiano. We are very happy to be with you today. Next topic will be related to returns with ethical, environmental, economic returns with animal-free investment. So it's Alexandra and I think Manich will join in the presentation. So we are very happy to meet you online. So welcome. And so Alexandra, you can begin. We are a bit early, but it doesn't matter. I think it's lunchtime, just 5 minutes early, so we can go. Thank you. So if you have slides, you can share them, or do you need our help?
I think I can just share the screen if necessary.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for inviting me to be here today. It's a pleasure to be here, especially with such titans of vegan investment. So I'm going to talk a bit about how we actually measure the impact of our investments. I work for Veg Capital, which is an impact investment, early stage impact investment fund. And with my colleague Manish, we're just in the process of launching an early growth stage £30 million fund with the mission to remove animals from production. So I'm going to talk a bit about how we measure that. I'm going to go slightly off piste as well, because I just want to follow on from some of the important points that Sebastiano made in terms of, policy and what we require and what we don't have in that respect, because I think it's a really important subject as well. My background is actually in policy, so it's something that I can speak quite confidently about through my own personal experience there. But just to start on measuring impact, I mean, to measure the impact of our investments, while my colleague Manish will talk more about the financial returns, how do we actually measure? What metrics are we using to measure? Are we actually having the impact that we desire? Because we are impact investors. Our mission is to remove animals from production, to replace animals in the food chain or in the wider sort of supply chain. We have been working in order to give the best measurement based on the best data. We're working with an impact monitoring and measurement specialist who's joined the team, who was working in development aid, managing government aid budgets, but felt that he was limited in the good that he could do, and recognizing animal agriculture as one of the leading drivers of so many crises that we're currently living in, joined the team and has put together a very comprehensive impact measurement tool that we can actually, like I said, based on the best data. So we're looking at FAO data, we're looking at Oxford, Our World in Data, to measure different metrics. So we have 6 key metrics that we measure that we will use to assess an investment opportunity, and we can also then use to further monitor and report back on the investments that we make. So we're looking primarily, we very much put animals at the center because it is animal farming, and I think Sebastiano's gone into this in great detail, so I don't need to, but it is animal production is driving numerous environmental crises that is still a large taboo and largely ignored subjects, but we're really putting animals at the center. So we're looking at the key metric is animal lives spared. So how many animal lives spared can we estimate on the best data, the best assumption that we would make from this investment? Now, of course, if we're talking about animal lives spared, then we're going to get a lot of chickens and fish because they are the most numerous. So we also need to weight this with days of suffering. It's also a very important metric, because you can, dairy cows, for example, you may not be sparing as many lives. Of course, there is the issue, male calves are routinely shot as not being productive. But to be a dairy cow is a very, very miserable existence. I think if you had to, it'd be a terrible choice to be any form of cow in production, but dairy would be the worst. So that's, so in terms of the days of suffering, cheese production, milk production, etc. So that's another important metrics to weight our investment decisions. And of course, we look at, from removing the animals, the reduced greenhouse gas emissions, the reduced land use, land pressure, the reduced water pollution, the reduced water extraction. So how we do this, we're not looking at the life cycle analysis of the entire product, because you've got the entire supply chain, you've got the packaging, etc. And while that is important and it's aspiration to build this out, primarily we want to look at what are the impacts and the benefits of swapping animal protein with non-animal protein. So at its simplest, it could be a chicken nugget versus an animal chicken nugget versus a plant-based chicken nugget. And we can input, I'll share my screen. So we're launching this tool in the coming months. So I can share my screen just to give you a sort of basic example of it. Right, that will have to do. Can you all see this?
Yes, maybe you can put it full screen.
Yeah, actually, I think best way to do it is to do it on the PDF. Is that, yeah, yes. Sorry, too many things open. Is that a bit better? So what we're looking at is inputting, for example, 100 grams of animal protein versus 100 grams of alternative.
So maybe you can make it bigger, maybe.
Yeah. Let me remember how to do that.
You can suppress on the right. I think you can have maybe.
Sorry, I'm not very tech literate. I can do other stuff. But.
Yes, it's view, maybe view or something.
Yeah, it's view, isn't it?
View full screen.
Oh,
yes,
all right. Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Oops. Now we've got an invoice. Sorry about this. View full screen mode. There we are.
Yes. And so that's it's still.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be working. I don't know.
Doesn't work. Yes.
I think it's because Zoom's taking my full screen. But in any case, I mean, if you can see this, because I'm going to, this is, I can talk through it. We're basically looking at the amount invested, how many animal lives spared, so we can input a measurable data unit like 100 grams of protein versus 100 grams, and we can then measure these specific metrics to give us the best informed assumption of the benefits of our investments. So that's what we're looking to build this out. I mean, the data doesn't always exist, so we're also looking to build this resource of data to make this a much more useful tool. But in the immediate term, where we just want to be able to report back to our LPs, but also for our own understanding of how we are actually achieving the mission, because you do have a paradox where data, you see a lot of hype around the movement, but actually data showing an increase in consumption, particularly in chickens and pigs, which are more intensively farmed and have, a more miserable existence, but we're seeing increased consumption. So actually, what is going on here? How do we actually understand the measurements in terms of the impacts that we're achieving? So that is, that's the metrics that we're using. I'm going to stop the screen share because I don't think I managed to do that particularly well.
So maybe you can put your slide again, because it's very difficult to read it.
Yeah, I can send it. I think.
Yes, you send it to Vanessa, and she can put it on the screen. That's the best way, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, I think that's it's we all discuss and we all look to make the best investments and how we're actually measuring that. So I think this is a wider conversation that as impact investors we should all be, because there are various different metrics. A lot of them are very focused on carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emission reduction, often leaving sort of animals or the suffering of animals out of the equation of that measurement. And you can have, if you were to transition from beef to chicken, which is a lower greenhouse gas emission, although responsible for more carbon, destruction of carbon sinks for their feed. But if you were to transition, then from an animal welfare point of view, it'd actually be more animals would suffer, and it would actually have a negative consequence. I actually wanted to move on to just talking a bit about the regulatory environment, because I worked for about 12 years in Brussels in the European Parliament and for an international animal protection organization. And so just to discuss a bit more what we actually need, because while we need I believe there are 3 pillars to shift consumption. We need, number 1, we need alternatives. We need better alternatives. We need better choices. Number 2, we need a supportive policy and regulatory environment. And number 3, we need to work with farmers. And all of these are very sort of interlinked. But in terms of the policy and regulatory environment, why it's difficult for plant-based products to meet price parity is because animal products are so unnaturally cheap. should never be, you shouldn't be able to buy, you know, a bag of cheap chicken for, you know, €1 or whatever it may be. And that's because they're heavily subsidized. They receive a lot of government support in terms of promotional campaigns and this kind of thing. They are also bailed out. You've got stockpiles of milk, you know, stockpiling these animal products and then dumping them in other regions, which, you know, the ethics around that as well. So trying to achieve a change there obviously will affect, if you're not looking to incentivize, if it's too controversial to incentivize the animal alternative industry, at least we should be looking at disincentivizing animal products, because currently they just thrive in a very favorable environment, which makes them easy to access, very available, very affordable. So that's really, but I completely agree with Sebastiano that, you know, to achieve change here is almost impossible. I mean, it's a very frustrating area to work in. However, I do see a bit of light at the end of the tunnel. When I started working in this space in 2008, we used to hang everything on one report, which was livestock's long shadow in 2006 by the FAO, which highlighted, you know, the climate and environmental impact of animal agriculture. Now, things have come a long way since then. Back then, none of the, you know, international institutions or governments would actually recognize the impact or discuss the impact of animal agriculture, the climate impact. Whereas now you've got the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change making bold statements about shifting consumption. You've got the European Commission strategy, farm to fork strategy. Of course, it is being completely ignored by the European Parliament. As likewise in the UK, you've got the National Food Strategy, which recommends a 30% reduction in consumption of animal products, and also recommends investment in alternative proteins. Of course, being completely ignored, George Eustace, the Ag Minister, announced on the publication of the government strategy that they would be focusing, they would not be recommending reduction in consumption. They would be focusing on technology to reduce emissions, which, you know, you're often further intensifying animal production. So absolutely not something that we support. So yeah, it's a very difficult environment, but when you get one sentence in these kind of high level bodies, it actually does show that there will be a shift, because you can't, the ethics around, as Sebastiano has already discussed, feeding grains and leguminous crops to animals over humans. It has always been an issue that we discussed, but, you know, it's very acute now because of the war in Ukraine. Other issues that Veronique mentioned, the pandemic, it hasn't changed consumption as much as we had hoped. And there is, you know, there is the threat of, if this was an avian flu pandemic, which fortunately now is not very contagious in humans, but it is highly deadly, that would be a global disaster, as would be antimicrobial resistance, which would throw our medicine system back 100 years. So all of these issues linked to animal agriculture, which will start, politicians are going to start having to introduce policies to reduce the way we consume and produce animals, and also then looking at the opportunities that the freeing up of that land would offer in terms of alternative forms of food production, but also there's also alternative forms of economy, or just rewilding. We've got climate policy, carbon farming, so creating carbon sinks. So sorry if I've gone a little bit off piece, but I think it's quite an interesting subject just to look at that sort of top-down approach. But I will let my colleague Manish step in and talk about the finance, the economics in terms of the returns on animal-free investments.
Alexandra, can you send your slide maybe to Vanessa, because she can put it on the site.
Yes, of course.
Yes, okay. Thank you.
Good morning, all. I think good afternoon for some of you as well. Pleasure to be introduced. I'm Manish Karani. As Adi mentioned, we've set up a new fund called Sentient Ventures, a £30 million pre-Series A, sort of Series A fund to focus on the plant-based space. My background specifically is sort of private equity investment banking for about 12 years. I've worked at some of the larger establishments, the likes of Credit Suisse, Royal Bank of Scotland. And the reason why I'm kind of bringing this up is, having worked at major banks and looked after sort of billions of dollars of assets under management, and actually allocating funds to various private ventures, to stock markets, to bonds, to cash, to property. I think it's really important to kind of talk about that. Obviously, I would say this sector specifically, based on my experience for the last 11 years, obviously there's been a financial benefit of investing in it. But actually, I think we need to really get into the individuals and some of the institutions as to why they're investing in this space. Financial returns is, of course, important. But the conversations I think that we have is actually much more than that. I think we can thank the likes of Beyond Meat, Oatly, who have actually been sort of the flags and the pioneers of recognition in this space of what the plant-based space can really do. And actually, that's been great because actually the PR, the success, obviously up until the IPO, and the fact that you can really see these products on the shelves and people can touch them and feel them, has actually just brought much more awareness and fund flows to the space. And I actually still think that we've got a long way to go. It's an exciting journey. And obviously, if we kind of talk about a couple of stats, I think in the last decade, we've had $11 billion of monies invested in this space, with actually 8 billion in the last 2 years. So you can see there's a big, obviously, growth in this space in terms of assets under management and fund flows. So I think for us specifically, when it comes down to returns, look, I think it's a really interesting time. I would say the last 2.5 years with COVID has kind of inflated a lot of the performance, to be honest, across some of our sort of investments. We generally invest in sort of the private businesses. Most of our investments to date have been in the UK. That's starting to change now with the new fund, because we will be focusing UK, India, Singapore, US, so more internationally. The last 2.5 years have seen a lot of cheap money out there due to COVID, to be honest. And that's probably driven a lot of the asset value across the private sector and obviously the stock market. And I think obviously now is a really interesting time to kind of see how performance is going to play out this year, because obviously inflation's at an all-time high. There is very much signs of a consumer recession. So we'll kind of see how the plant-based space, as I think, some of the individuals before me have spoken, the products are slightly on the higher side in terms of price versus, their non-plant-based alternatives. So we'll kind of see how that will play out. But if you look at fundamentals, and that's often what we look at and what we're investing in, we've invested in over about 40 companies over the last 24 months. And for us, it's much more important to focus on the fundamentals of what we're investing in. So, we'll be looking at founders, what made them go into this space? What are they passionate about? Product, is this product really better than its non-vegan equivalent? Can it last? Can it last multiple years? Can it keep going? Can it keep innovating? And I think the third thing is, going back to kind of the investors that we manage, that we deal with, this is not just a financial play. I think this is something which investors are very passionate about. And I think it's really important. This is not something that we're looking at to invest in just to, make financial returns. This is the planet that we're looking to save. And in the day, the more money that comes into this space, the more money that we create from, working with good portfolio managers like us, like our competitors, we're hoping to see returns that will sort of last over the next 3 to 5 years. So, that's kind of us in terms of financial performance. quite interesting. I know the stock market is quite far down at the moment. The S&P 500, I believe, is around 20% down this year. If you look at our portfolio and our businesses, if you look at asset values right now, we're all of our portfolios up around 71% this year. So we're still up. Revenue wise, we're up around 40% on average year on year across our portfolio. So obviously fundamentally, we kind of have still picked the best companies, but of course there's a long way to go. And I think that lack of cheap capital and normalization of valuations is going to be interesting. I think we're pretty much value add investors anyway. So to be honest, valuations, we never really got too carried away with them. There was a lot of big fundraisings happening last year, Nobel Foods, Formo Foods, Stockheld Dairy. But for us, kind of, we're targeting more 3 to 7x returns over a 5-year period. I think there's a long way to go, an interesting time. But look, if you look at us compared to other asset classes, which I think you should, we're in a really, really strong position. And I think there's a long way to go. I want this to be a bit more interactive. So if anyone has any questions, please, it will help me a lot.
Do we have questions? Otherwise, I have some. So, the moment I'm checking. Yes, I'm going to see if you have a question on the chat. Yes. It's relating to work. It's from Alex. How does one find work at a vegan investment fund or a venture out of college?
Ali, why didn't you answer this one?
Yeah, I mean, I guess just get networked in with the community. So there's a lot of, on LinkedIn, for example, there's a lot of vegan groups. So just make introductions. I don't think there's one route in. It's really just getting to know get to know the space, get to understand space, get to have some good thoughts about the space and the impacts as well, because I think we're always impressed by people who come to us who have a really comprehensive understanding and are also very mission driven. So if you can express that in like a really sort of tangible way, then it's a really collegial community. We all share the same mission. So I would just suggest get on social media, get to the event. I mean, now events, forget that events are happening in real life now as well. So get down to the network, talk, learn, and network also with people who are working at these kind of organizations.
Another question. I'm looking for.
Yeah, I see Coralie has been said effectively. I should have actually. How do you ensure that you're not just creating an additional market with associated environmental impacts, but instead of effectively replacing meat, dairy products with vegan options? This is an important point, and I actually should have mentioned it when I was discussing our impact measurement tool, because we measure product displacement. So we are basing it on data that says that it's where products are actually displacing animal products. Because agreed, there's no point us learning how many veggie burgers a vegan eats, because that isn't creating any additional impact. So we do all of our measurements, so it does limit the measurement more. And again, you have to base this on the best research and data that has been done to date. But we are specifically looking at this. But it's also a reason, it's a really good point that you're raising this, because it's also a reason why we're doing this. Because while you look at the data saying increases in consumption of particular animal products, while we're seeing an increase in plant-based consumption, you do have to question what's going on there. Are people just eating more? So we are also trying to understand that. We want to ensure that we are, we invest We don't invest generically in vegan products. We invest in products that are going head to head with an animal product, because a vegan product could be a snack bar, or if it's another milk, unless it's really exceptional and really can go head to head with cow's milk. If it's going to knock oat milk or almond milk, then, you know, we're not interested. We're looking at the products that can actually displace and go head to head with the animal product. So it's a really important point, and that's, you know, it's our aspiration. We're trying to understand this. We're trying to build up the data, our data and our understanding, because that is our objective. That is our goal.
I have a question relating to the your metrics. So you have 6 metrics. Then do you succeed in controlling the whole process? That's what I asked Sebastian before, and because you need to make sure that all your criteria are met. So how do you cope with that? Because it might be intricate.
How do we cope? Well, we do have a staff, you know, an expert who has many years working on the development and monitoring of specific metrics, and he has developed this platform, this tool. We have kept it as simple as possible because we don't want to burden our startups. They've got enough to do without like some really cumbersome reporting that they have to. So this is to give us, we have kept it as simple as possible that he can actually you know, look into all of the data and produce the best assumption in terms of the impact that we're achieving without it being a burden, becoming a burden to. So it's a work in progress. We are tweaking and perfecting it as we go.
Mm-hmm. And I have another question relating to the performance, because do you calculate, well, you need to calculate performance because I guess you need to have returns anyhow. Now, do you break down the returns? I mean, because you have qualitative returns, you have quantitative returns. How do you try to cope with that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about probably more of the financial returns. Ali, maybe you can talk about the other kind of metrics that we put. So we generally sort of review the portfolio because we're private equity, private companies. We generally review the performance and provide an update every quarter on the valuation of the companies. We base those valuations on traditionally sort of a multiple in line with the market of revenue or EBITDA, depending on what area that we're focusing on. And obviously we kind of use that multiple we basically use as kind of the industry standard on that. We also, to be honest, we have a lot of obviously follow-on investors, and when I mean, I don't mean sort of kind of family friend investors. I mean institutional investors, private equity funds, etc., that are constantly looking to either exit our positions or looking to follow on at premium values. I'm saying premium because we've not actually had a situation where we've had a down round yet. And obviously, if that is the case and an offer letter is issued at that premium valuation, whether we take it or not, then that would kind of be the benchmark of what our new valuation would be. So it kind of gives us a bit more of a sensitivity check on kind of exactly what we're doing on that side. And yeah, I think that's probably the main thing on the financial side. I think on the other areas, I think Ali, maybe you want to talk about the other areas.
Yeah, I mean, we are just launching our fund. We have made our first investment. So we are in the relatively early. So like I said, it's a work in progress. So we will be monitoring and reporting back to LPs on the impact based on the sales, achieving certain targets of these startups. So because there are a number of different sort of impact monitoring tools being used currently, we are also open to, coordinating or partnering. So we really want to see how to best use this and how to perfect it, and if it is working. So like I said, we're in the very early stages of And having made only our first, we are looking, because I work for Veg Capital and Sentient Ventures, so we are looking at whether we can use this with Veg Capital as well. Veg Capital has actually, we've paused investments currently because we have about 30 companies in our portfolio, which we want to focus on assisting these companies rather than taking on new portfolio companies for the time being. So, but it is something that we would look to bring into Veg Capital as well.
I understand that, coming back to what Manish said, you rely on, let's say, classic multiples, let's say, for valuations. But if you don't use a premium, it means that you can have an undervaluation. The project, the company may be undervalued because, in fact, I think you have the problem of including the long-term positive impact, which is difficult to quantify. It's the issue we have with sustainable projects. So you just consider a premium which may reflect the, let's say, the vegan aspect, or can you give more explanations on that? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think this is a really open-ended and kind of difficult question, because, okay, like we have I don't know, a restaurant business that we've invested in, for example. We kind of know roughly what the value of a restaurant business is because it's readily information is readily available online from competitors and peers. Do we put an additional premium because it's unique and because it's sort of vegan? No, because that's very much subjective. Obviously, when we're reporting back to our investors, we don't. When we are looking to raise more money from new investors or looking to sell our position, then obviously that's a very different discussion. But we wouldn't put that in our performance update back to our investors, if you make sense, because it's just it's not the ethical thing to do, to be honest. But obviously we believe there is some value outside of just a multiple. But obviously that's kind of the management team, the IP creation, the uniqueness of the brand, and that's kind of our day jobs, really. But obviously for like a restaurant business or a vegan chocolate brand or something, that's relatively easy to kind of measure. I think being very open and honest, where I struggle with is, and I think this has only come out in the last 1 year, is the likes of businesses raising at $100 million valuations with IP creation. They've created a cheese without dairy through certain scientific IP created products. I personally haven't invested in that kind of area. We haven't invested specifically as yet in that. I think we've made one on that side, but I wasn't massively involved in that. And I think trying to show that as a sort of a value, because there's no real comparables, to be honest, on this is a bit trickier. But ultimately, I think in that situation, or you're kind of looking at, well, what is the next qualified institutional or strategic investor willing to pay for that, and that would basically be your valuation. I think there was a lot of big raises last year in this space. And we'll see I think the follow-ons will probably start to happen this sort of the next the next quarters, the next half a year. And then we'll kind of see how that valuation plays out, given the economic backdrop. But yeah, I think these things are constantly evolving. And, we're in a different cycle of the economy right now. So I think only time will tell. But it is the job of the fund managers and us to make sure that, if we do get in, there is some kind of substance and realization as to why, and there probably will be. But as I said, I think when it comes to the IP creation, it's not really, I guess, my core strength. We kind of look between 3 to 7x returns, and that's not really that IP creation side. But again, Ali, I don't know, maybe you have a kind of different look on that as well. I'm not sure.
No, I think you covered that pretty well.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Thank you very much, Manish. I'm going to check the chat again, but I think we can move on. Now Claire is going to give a presentation on vegan climate ETF and a comparison with classic indices. So Claire, I think.
Yes, I'm here, and I'll just turn my video on.
Okay.
So yeah, here I am, and I'm just looking to share the presentation that I've put together for this, which actually covers a little bit more than you've just outlined. Just give me a second. Okay, and I think you should all see the front page of the presentation now. Yes?
That's good. Yes.
Okay, good. The question being asked was, how do vegan funds perform in comparison with other major indices? So obviously that's relevant to the extent that there is an index that one can compare it with, which is the case for public listed equities. It's not for venture capital, but we do have some information on that as well. We are looking not just at our vegan climate index and the and any products on that, but also at another index which we created last year and have actually did actually develop it earlier than that. So we have data from previous times too. And as I said, we will mention venture capital along the way. So our purpose is this, and our kind of slogan is investing for humanity, with humanity meaning two things, both the property of being humane, which is the definition, which not everybody seems to understand. When I say humanity, it doesn't just mean mankind, it actually means to be humane. And in addition to that, we are investing for humanity because as or the continued existence of humanity on Earth as well, because as Sebastiano very clearly outlined, continuing to use animals in the way that we do undermines our own existence and is doing so over a very short period of time, both because of the issues of water, food production, as well as the methane, which accelerates the climate change, as we know, by risking various tipping points if temperatures increase dramatically. So this takes us across a broad range of products. So we are delivering portfolios which exclude, as far as is possible and practical, the exposure to any form of animal exploitation, not just in food. And we are creating portfolios which promote the development and use of animal-free alternatives. This is both in the listed and the unlisted space. Separately, we are promoting investments which we are not necessarily investing in ourselves, which benefit animals, humans, and the environment through another entity called Beyond Animal, which possibly you're aware of. I would encourage you very much to join and bring the ecosystem onto a common online platform. And overall, we want to accelerate the transition to an economy free of animal exploitation, aka a vegan economy. In terms of myself, I have been vegan for a long time and was vegetarian before that. And equally, I have a long period of experience in financed investment. Sadly, I have encountered 3 market crashes in my lifetime, and possibly, if you include the current one, 4. Maybe the COVID one makes it 5. On that basis, obviously, I've got a long experience in markets and looking at companies, and have created obviously the investment platform, and I'm directly overseeing or directly managing the vegan venture impact strategy. And I have a team that I'm working with on the screening and the construction of the index products. So why invest animal free? Well, there's some numbers there in terms of total number of animals. The fish is extraordinarily under reported there, that was really just an estimation based on maybe the average size of a fish, because it's only in tonnage. I've heard some numbers recently that go into the trillions. But if you do want to avoid exploiting animals, then you should definitely be looking at where you put your investments, because your investments, if they are in companies which are harming animals, even, you know, your small investment may be, you might think it's really not making any difference, but, you know, it's the power of collective action. If every individual went vegan, then that would make a big difference. If every individual was to move assets away from companies that exploit animals, and was to persuade the holders of their assets, such as the pension funds, etc., to undertake divestment schemes in the same way as they have with the fossil fuel companies, then it would make an enormous amount of difference. So that's why we are doing what we are doing. And it does relate also to the Sustainable Development Goals, which are, you know, not ideal in many ways, but they are guiding government policy through to 2030. And reducing animal exploitation is beneficial. If you look at our website of my foundation, Beyond Cruelty, then you will see reasons why stopping exploiting animals is actually beneficial to all of the SDGs, but it is particularly beneficial to the ones that I've highlighted on this chart, which relate obviously to the natural environment, to health, well-being, hunger, responsible consumption and production, clean water and sanitation, segueing obviously into some of the points that were made earlier around the excessive use of water by animal by animal agriculture, effect on diversity of cutting down the rainforest, etc. So overall, we believe that there should be an overarching SG 18, which is a goal towards reducing animal exploitation to zero, and we very much would appreciate and like everybody to get behind that with us in our campaign. So let's talk about investment. So essentially, it's possible and desirable to try and bring into your investment philosophy, process, and the practicalities of how you make investments, to consider how you can avoid animal exploitation or invest proactively to rid us of animal exploitation across your entire portfolio. And a very simplified sort of risk and return investment chart there, which takes you from cash and cash equivalents. So, you know, certainly for the last several years, I thought that there's a need and certainly it would be desirable to have a vegan bank. And that's something that would be good, and I'd be very happy to be involved in that as well. And all the way through to alternative investments and venture capital, which are the highest risk. But there's a lot of points along the way, from different bond portfolios, long-term, short-term, indexed, obviously mixed balance funds, which are taking into account bonds and equities, which is what your pensions will probably be made up of. There will be an allocation to bonds and allocation to equities. Equity index funds, obviously, which are rules-based active equity funds, and then moving into alternative investments and venture capital. And we would postulate that it would be desirable for animal exploitation to be considered all the way along, but the approach that needs to be taken at each stage is clearly different depending on the type of investment that it is. Evidently, in bonds, you can look at corporates, you can apply effectively the same screens that we use on equities to corporates to decide whether you would want to be involved in a corporate bond fund or buy particular corporate bonds of those companies. Not aware of any vegan corporate bond fund. It's something that we would be very happy to work with others on, using the screens that we've already done on the global equities, because we are now covering global equities. We've analysed about 3,500 companies at this stage. Clearly, index funds is a rules-based approach, so we're applying our own rules, our own proprietary screens onto to create those index funds, and that creates effectively a benchmark for vegan investing as well. Active equity funds, obviously, as you go further down the scale, then you're moving into small and mid cap space, and you have to look at the prospects of the companies, take into account more in respect of growth prospects, financial strength, balance sheet, and the earnings. So that's something that can be done, but you could limit your universe to those companies that have passed our screens as being not using animals. And obviously, there's also a place for proactive funds, which are directly investing in those companies which are creating those products which avoid the use of animals, or which replace the use of animals, or are generally, supportive to the incorporation into the supply chain of animal alternatives. And obviously venture capital, that's clearly helping companies start up and grow to a point where they can IPO. So that's the kind of risk return chart. And our intent with the platform is essentially to try and identify or launch products ourselves, which are meeting a need all the way along that spectrum, or work with others to help them launch using the research that we've done since 2017 in this space. So I talked a bit about our vegan screening policies, and as I said, these are proprietary. So far as I know, there's not anybody else that has done this amount of work and has this amount of data in terms of policies, and have been tracking companies and made determinations on companies based on a set of policies around avoiding animal exploitation. The obvious and very, kind of evident place where you can strip out exploitation, and by doing so, you're actually avoiding the major part of animal exploitation is clearly in animal agriculture. But we also look at the entire supply chain. So we are looking at the rearing and breeding of animals for any use of their body parts or secretion, abattoirs, transport of live animals, but going all the way through the supply chain, looking at equipment, chemicals, technology, machinery related to this intensive farming and transportation of live animals, food processing of animal products, food retailers and animal-based restaurants, catering companies, leisure and lodging with animal-derived food, and other types of byproducts of animals, such as the gelatin, collagen, leather, fish farming, fur, wool, retailers who are deriving a material part of revenues from animal-derived products, and evidently anything to do with taking animals from the wild. The next page goes into other vegan screening policies, and I have to say, these are, as important to a vegan, I think, in terms of animal exploitation as the animal agriculture, and some areas where I've noticed that others don't seem to necessarily consider them. But certainly animal testing is one where we are removing quite a decent number of companies in sort of non-consumer area. So healthcare, materials, some industrials type companies are being removed because of these animal testing screens that we are doing, which are going down to the product level. And evidently, obviously, the rearing and breeding of animals for testing purposes, or any location where that's being done. So we've removed, for example, real estate investment trusts where their assets are lab facilities. In terms of animals in sport and entertainment, clearly, racing of animals, breeding them for racing, pet stores, intensive breeding, fishing, gambling, where betting involves animals, the hunting, as I mentioned again, media production, zoos, theme parks, travel, and obviously genetic modification of animals as well. Because we think that there's probably quite a high overlap between people who are vegan and people who are concerned about the climate and the environment in general, we also bring in additional screens which are clearly beneficial to our natural environment, which is supportive to biodiversity and the continued existence of wild animals, which in terms of land animals is only 4% of zoomass, thanks to the fact that 96% is ourselves plus the animals that we rear for consumption. So we are removing fossil fuels, extraction, refining and burning of fossil fuels for energy production. So our portfolio will be, our indexes do take out utilities where the large part of the electricity being generated is from fossil fuel, and also obviously the oil services companies, carbon intensive industries, extractive industries, habitat destruction for other types of environmental impact, and also some social responsibility screens. The one that sort of sticks out, human rights there, almond does not have so much necessarily overlap with the animal exploitation, although sometimes it does actually. It's notable that some animal exploiting industries are not very nice to the humans who they employ either. In terms of armaments, I guess the principle there is, if you're not going to kill animals, why would you kill humans? And also, obviously animals can be sort of collateral damage along the way. And tobacco falls out in any case because of animal testing, because they still keep beagles in labs smoking. So our first index was the US Vegan Climate Index. So it's derived from the imposition of those screens, and then we run through a portfolio construction and exercise, which takes into account some risk spreading amongst the top stocks in the market, because otherwise they would become too concentrated. We're taking out, if you look at the chart that is on the top right, that is actually a sort of exclusion chart. So that tells you how much percentage of the market we are removing as a function of our animal exploitation screens. And you'll see that, if you add up those numbers, you're getting to broadly, towards 50%. So if you take out 50% of the market and then you gross it up to 100, because obviously we're not just going to take out the 50% and leave the rest lying around as cash, then you can see how you could get concentration in some companies, potentially the mega caps, in which case we are, deliberately compressing that at every rebalance. And then doing reweighting across the portfolio. And then in addition to that, that does lead to some sector tilts, let's say. And that's highlighted on the left-hand side with the, as you can see, the S&P 500 versus the vegan portfolio. The primary tilts would be an overweight communications and technology, and an underweight consumer staples, energy, healthcare, materials, utilities. We'd love to do something about that, but unless the companies actually change what they're doing, we're not going to be able to hold them. And we can't, with the best will in the world, suddenly create plant-based companies that are as large as, I don't know, plant-based restaurant groups that are as large as McDonald's, or plant-based companies that are as large as the big meat producers or the sort of mixed production companies. So we can only invest in what is there and what is available in the market. So the performance from June 2018, you'll see in actual fact, in terms of these charts, notwithstanding the fact that we are removing quite a lot of companies from the index, we are achieving performance which is comparable to the index in terms of risk and return. The green line is the vegan index, and the blue line is the S&P 500 index. So you'll see from its live performance start from 2018, you will see that there was outperformance at various points, particularly strongly through 2020 into 2021. That performance has abated, so we have underperformed from starting some way through 2021, probably first or second quarter, and have underperformed the market since that time. And I can go into some of the reasons for that. Not too surprisingly, it will be because of sectors. And you'll see that in actual fact, in 20, you'll see the first few months where we ran the index from 2018, there was a weaker market. The tech sector was underperforming particularly. 2019 was strong performance, as was 2020 through 2021. Sorry, there should be pluses against those. But in 2022 year to date, obviously the market has come off. We've come off slightly more than the market. And in 2021, I think we were broadly in line or slightly below by a couple of percentage points maybe. What was quite evident though was that there was some quite major sort of differentials in performance. I'm going to focus a little bit on 2020 and 2021 because you saw that there was quite strong performance from the previous performance chart in 2020. And a lot of that was quite sort of COVID related, let's say. With some particular benefits to our portfolio of the weakness of oil prices, and in addition to that, to the sort of closure, let's say, of the hospitality industry. In 2021, the market was doing some strange things in terms of differentials in performance. And we were seeing the consumer sector coming back. That was a negative to us, and obviously the technology sector also underperformed in 2021 as well. So these are obviously key effects to our portfolio to the extent that you saw the differential weightings on the previous chart. Now this is quite a busy slide, but we have basically been doing attribution of the performance over the period that we've been running the portfolio live or the index live. And essentially it shows you each year what screens. This is essentially identifying these differences in performance to the single stock, and then identifying why we do not hold that stock, because obviously our principal focus here is the exclusion. And then identifying what impact that had on the portfolio. So when we produce this data and we produce these charts, what we're actually doing is we are identifying that to the extent that we were removing animal-derived products, let's say, or animal testing, what effect that had on the portfolio. Now, in 2020, I mentioned the hospitality industry, and I'm just going to sort of highlight a few things that I think are interesting. So animal-derived products actually, on the 2020 attribution, you'll see that it's slightly detracted from our performance. And that was because obviously everybody was going to the supermarket, and the supermarkets had an absolute field day because, the hospitality industry was closed, the supermarkets went up. We generally don't hold any supermarket stocks because of the amount of meat that's in the aisles. And so that actually was slightly negative to us. But if you look at, say, high carbon, now that's where we are removing some stocks partly because of animal exploitation, potentially, I'm thinking of cruise lines, airlines are definitely in there. So you'll see that provided quite a good boost to the performance there, because it's showing, the high carbon is showing as a high amount of that excess return, as is fossil fuel. You'll see another 14% of the net outperformance came from that lack of exposure to fossil fuel, because during COVID, I think even at one point the sort of forward oil price went negative or something because it cost money to store oil that nobody was using. Weapons also during that period was a positive to the portfolio. That changed a bit in 2021 as we came out of COVID, and we saw some, slightly different shifts in the performance of different sectors. And so we saw these slightly, somewhat more chunky contributions in terms of other environmental, where this was slightly underperformance versus the market. So the other environmental, so some of those, airlines, cruise lines, etc., were actually then contributing to the fact that we had underperformed slightly the market. Again, the animal-derived products, that also contributed slightly to that underperformance versus the market as we came out of COVID. What we're seeing in 2022 is some performance detraction versus the market, thanks to the fossil fuels, obviously. We're seeing the weapons as being another detractor. We're seeing some of these other ones. The human rights actually is mostly mining. And so for those types of reasons, and the use of those as materials within those sectors, that's been causing some problems in the portfolio. But the key thing is, along with the vast majority of ESG funds, the underperformance versus the market is principally coming from the fossil fuels, and to an extent some of these other impacts like the weapons, etc. Those are the ones that really stick out. I mean, if you believe that things are going to go on as they are currently, then you probably shouldn't be in ESG. It doesn't feel very sort of ESG friendly at the moment, the market. But obviously we hope that the struggles that are going on in the world at the moment, particularly with the oil price, with the issues with energy production, food production, etc., will swing things in our favor as people start to realize that they need to move away from these types of industries. So we have created global and European. So I'm just looking at the European, and you'll see some very similar trends. We do have the overweights in terms of the sectors. We're applying exactly the same screens to create the Europe Index, and we released that in June of last year, 2021. We do have back history through to June 2018, as you see. And you'll see some outperformance during the same period, and then some underperformance during the same period because of the same types of factors. The amount of exclusion is about the same. We have slightly different sector weightings, and that's a function of the different composition of the European market. Frankly, we don't have as big a tech sector in Europe, so the tech sector in vegan doesn't get as big as it is in this vegan or vegan if you're French. Then it's not going to it's not going to be as big in Europe as it is in the US, because the US tech sector is obviously somewhat bigger, and we do have some different tilts there. We're slightly more in financials and industrials in Europe. The big German industrial companies, they compose a high amount of the European index, so they're going to compose a high amount of any vegan index. And then just looking at the global, again, you'll see the same type of feature in terms of the exclusions. In each of these, you'll see that the animal-derived products is generally the largest. Sometimes the animal testing, particularly in the US, seems to get almost as high as the animal-derived products. So the vegan screens are imposing an additional screen, which is taking out, at least 30% of the market, which we are really seeing other providers of investment products just completely ignore in terms of a screen. And they're focusing on, the financing of, the fossil fuel, the military and defense, possibly. But they're just not looking at a lot of things that we're looking at. Maybe they exclude them for other types of reasons or deprioritize them. But we think that, they're kind of, tinkering out around the edges, kind of ESG or exclusionary, whereas we're obviously, hardcore. The other thing that we do in terms of impact, in terms of metrics, is that we actually prove that our the composition of our index is significantly better for the environment in terms of carbon, both scope 1 and 2 and scope 3, which not many people actually report, waste generation and water consumption. And so these bar charts are showing you the percentage of those those sort of negative environmental impacts versus the S&P 500. And this is for the US. We get very similar numbers for the other global and European index as well. And whereas some companies do a decent job of decarbonizing, some funds do a decent job of decarbonizing at the scope 1 and 2 level, nobody is doing as good a job of decarbonizing at the scope 3 level amongst the ones that we have investigated as potential peers. So we're, something like 2/3 of the best of those and quite a lot lower than the worst. In terms of, no, we're actually a lot lower than pretty much everybody. The waste generation as well, we're significantly lower. This is where it really scores in terms of the waste generation and the water consumption. Waste generation, I see one which is comparable, but on the water consumption, we're still lower. And you'll see that their scope 3 is also significantly higher than ours. So if you look at those on an overall basis, then we are the most climate friendly and environmentally friendly, biodiversity friendly as well, because we are avoiding the polluting stocks and avoiding the water, the consuming stocks, as well as being decarbonized both at scope 1 and 2 and at scope 3. So I highlighted that as you go down the capitalization band, you can start to think a little bit more proactively about the type of companies that you want to go into. The previous the previous indexes that were discussed were exclusionary indexes based on large cap broad market indexes. So that's why we get these exposures to the technology, the financials, and the broader market, because these are intended to be replacing your core allocation to large cap stocks. This is a proactive strategy which we developed in 2019. We researched it then and have been paper trading it through 2020, and then released a certificate based on this in mid-2021. It's proactively investing in listed companies whose products accelerate the transition away from the use of animals. And we do apply the same vegan screens. We do not think, oh, well, we'll put some money into Kellogg's because they have Morningstar Farm, but we ignore but let's not worry too much about the fact that, they're using egg in products or whatever, or milk. We are applying the same vegan screens before we would look at something and say, okay, it is a vegan company. We would, in terms of the products that it's creating, we can't find any evidence of animal exploitation. Is it also contributing through being vegan, through having this solely vegan product portfolio to the transition? So we're not making any compromises there on our screens. So we have small to mid cap growth stocks there with these animal friendly products or non-animal exploiting products, let's say, which are relevant to this shift in production. We're focused on the key sectors where animals are exploited, such as consumer staples, consumer discretionary, the materials sector, because evidently a company that we find that is vegan relevant in that space is going to be doing this displacement. So their products will be taking away from the products which are using animals. And we are tilting the portfolio towards high growth because this is a trend. And if you have a trend, then you want to tilt towards the companies that have momentum and particularly in terms of their sales momentum. Earnings momentum is slightly less relevant at this stage, given a number of companies are still, raising money and are not positive EBITDA. But there are still also some established companies that are positive EBITDA, and it's important not to forget them, and that creates balance in the portfolio and a certain defensiveness. So the market capitalization, I think, of everything in the portfolio is sub 15. We're avoiding highly volatile and illiquid penny shares. We don't want to get stuck in stocks, and we're running this on the basis of it being a strategy that can be operated with a 50 billion fund size. And it is more active than the indexes, the large cap indexes, which are rebalanced every 6 months. And this is actually reconstituted and rebalanced every 3 months. So every 3 months, we're checking for new stocks analyzing those, determining whether they should go into this product, and then trading the basket. So I thought this was interesting because, well, you wanted performance, you wanted some comparison of vegan funds versus other versus market indexes. What I have on this chart, besides our own index certificate, which is the green line going down, but by not the worst by any means. In addition to that, I've got on the MSCI All Country World Index. So that is the overall market of all global stocks, or the 1,600 major global stocks is the MSCI World. And that's the black line in the middle. So you can see that that's down, and we haven't actually underperformed that by too much. What we have performed in line with is some other sort of food and ag type funds. There's the food one called, which is the one in yellow from Rise ETF, which is called the Sustainable Food Fund, I believe. There's the Yummy, which is from Van Eck, in blue, which is Future of Food. There's Veggie, which is a global agriculture fund. That is significantly better performing, I think, really because of the rise in the price of the crops, essentially. And you'll also see MSCI Food and Agri. So you'll see that the Food and Agri Index from MSCI has not done as well as this Veggie. So it's the food part of it. The agriculture side of things is a very strong market at the moment. But the food companies, companies in that index are obviously dragging that performance down versus the performance of that VEGI ETF. And you'll see that there was a launch of a plant-based ETF around the turn of the year. That has underperformed. Our index has outperformed that by almost 10% year to date. And if anybody wants some attribution or commentary on the differentials in performance, I prefer to take that offline. But they're welcome to get into contact with me. But the thing I would like to obviously highlight is only the Vegan World Index Certificate is applying these anti-animal exploitation screen. All others, and that includes the EATV, do include companies that fail our animal exploitation screen. So there is not a vegan ETF in this thematic space. Although obviously there is our certificate. In terms of investing in animal alternatives, the rationale is clearly because these are enormous markets, and the animal alternatives are displacing pre-existing markets where people and companies are clearly spending enormous amounts of money, and it's obviously a very active and big part of the economy. I won't go into that because people have already discussed it to some extent, but only to note that the Beyond Impact, which is the VC part of Beyond Investing, has been investing in these companies within a fund, which has a track record since 2017. These are some of the companies that I've invested in. And just from the perspective of, and some key trends at the bottom, which I won't go into them right now due to time, but we are investing our second fund, where we closed recently, did the initial first close with 25 million, and are continuing to fundraise for that. The fund one, which is closed, which has not been available for investment since the latter part of 2020, has invested across this space. So the investments were made from 2017 onwards through to 2020, and since then no investment has come in from investors. No investment has been made by that. No new investment made by that fund vehicle. But you can see the companies that I've invested in, and also you can see the, again, kind of highly diversified nature of the investing across different types of theme also by geography with positions across different places in Europe and US, Canada, one in Singapore, and also at different points in the supply chain, so not all in kind of CPG. And in terms of the IRR, we are very pleased to note that that fund has quite a decent IRR there of 43.5% net per annum through to the last quarter estimate. And in addition, almost half the portfolio is above entry price, notwithstanding that some of those entry prices were towards the back end of 2020. And some of them have increased by quite dramatic amounts, some by over 20 times. And you can see the proportion of the portfolio that has gone up by the different amounts on screen there. So just to conclude, we believe that friendly investing is now a fixture on the investment scene. We're clearly aware that other people are entering into this space, but we feel obviously that we were the initiators with the index in 2018, and obviously, also active in the venture capital space from that period of time. But having done the research, we think we have the most data and have done the most research in this area, at least as far as the public listed equities is concerned. We think in terms of investors and just thinking from a broader sense, in terms of if you are a larger investor and you have pre-existing legacy positions in your portfolios, you must clearly be conscious of the plant-based trend and the threat to existing portfolio holdings of this shift. If companies like the meat companies, they're dabbling in this space, putting in investment, but you have to look. I looked at Unilever, 55 billion, and they want to make 1 billion plant-based. Well, that's not really going to make that much difference, is it? They are going to be undermined to the extent that they don't have the plant-based products. And as there's increasing market share, it improves the efficiency. The investors need to be conscious of the environmental cost of animal production. I'm not sure what that last point was there. And they should be investing in these changing patterns of consumption. So considering some of the smaller stocks, the ones that are in our Vegan World Index, in order to be positioned towards these, obviously being very conscious of the pricing. We've seen obviously the pricing come back in a number of these as there's been increasing competition, and particularly from the incumbents in the food industry that, because of their low growth, now I remember, are now switching into the plant-based because they see that as the high growth sector of the food industry. So that's a really interesting dichotomy, that within the food industry, which is a very defensive sector, there are these high growth portions, and that's why they're interested in this space. We see ample opportunity for diversification, and we do see more capital becoming available. Evidently, there are new investment funds, but we do see money coming available from corporates that are taking strategic investments and also some government funding. So we do believe that people should take this portfolio-wide approach to removing the investment risk of these animal exploiting industries, and also be proactively investing in animal products in order to bring about a more sustainable future for all. And that's just our details if you want to get in touch with us. And I'll stop the screen share and answer any questions in the 6 minutes that remain.
Thank you, Claire. There is a question of Vandin on the chat. It's relating to the scope 3 of the vegan indices.
Yes, well, we're using the impact cubed analysis. Impact cubed is gathering together all of the available data from many different sources, and then doing a mapping of companies by the lowest level of granularity. And to the extent that companies are not providing data, they are mapping companies to their, across the sub-industries at the lowest level of the highest level of granularity to the most the most comparable companies. So effectively creating proxy companies of companies that do not provide data, and then using the data that is out there. So I guess it's a method of sort of mapping and interpolation.
Vandine, is it fine for you, or do you have extra questions? Okay, by comparison with peers. Okay.
Well, no, it's not actually just peer comparison. It's a bit more mathematical than that. But if you want more information on that, I would go through to Impact Cubed and ask for a subscription to their service.
Claire, I have a question for you. As you explained, your vegan index focuses on. Finally, when you do the comparison, it means that you are more on small and mid-cap growth companies. That's what you said, and high growth companies, which means that basically large caps and more mature companies are not very vegan at all, or are maybe slow into switching from non-vegan to vegan.
Well, yes, I mean, you know, in terms of the large cap companies, obviously we encourage them to switch to be more vegan, but to the extent that they're still involved in animal exploitation, we're not going to put them into our large cap indexes. We believe that basically the investment approach has to be relevant and appropriate to the type of company that you're looking at, and to the sector of the market that you're looking at. Now, you cannot create a large cap portfolio of vegan companies. Why? Because it would be empty. There aren't large vegan themed companies, as in purely vegan, only making vegan products. What you can do is within the lower sector of the market in terms of capitalization, there you can be more proactive. And it's, you know, in finance theory or portfolio management, it's core versus core satellite approach. So your core is the liquid large cap, which is where everybody has sort of 70% plus of their money. And then if you go into the satellite, then you can do the vegan thematic, and then you can look at these smaller stocks, which are purely vegan because they are newer companies, or they just haven't, you know, maybe they're not new as in created in the last few years, but they haven't grown because of the fact that there hasn't been as big a market, but they are starting to grow because there is a bigger market. Yes, so it's really about horses for courses. And it's in the small to mid cap space that you can be thematic. You can't be thematic within the large cap space. And if you try and just impose the thematic into the large cap, as soon as you put any kind of portfolio construction methodology that includes size into the equation, then the vegan companies will just get drowned out by all of the other larger companies. So that's why we have it as two separate portfolios.
Mm-hmm. David, I saw your question on the chat. Maybe you can ask directly to Claire. It will be maybe more convenient.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Claire just answered it though with that last question. And again, I was just going to get Claire's view on the idea of investing in vegan-run businesses versus non-vegan founded businesses who are making vegan products. But I think that Claire just fairly well covered that.
Well, yeah, no, actually, I was talking more about the company's products in the small to mid cap space being kind of wholly vegan products versus investing in companies that may, you know, in the large cap, we would not invest in anything that has no animal, that is doing animal exploitation. Whereas in this, and that's the same for the small cap. We are not taking a company and saying, well, they've got a few vegan products and isn't that nice, you know, give them a pat on the back and we'll put it into the portfolio. In terms of vegan run businesses versus non-vegan founded companies, that I think is only appropriate in terms of startups, because as soon as you get beyond a certain number of people within the company, I think it gets very difficult to impose a wholly vegan policy on staff. It may even actually be considered discriminatory. So it's probably not something that I would encourage people to do, to put in their job applications or you know, job postings. Must be vegan to apply or something like that. I think that may be an issue. But investing in startups in terms of vegan run businesses versus non-vegan founded companies, well, I mean, those are two companies of completely different scale for a start. So it would be unreasonable to expect Oatly to have an entirely vegan workforce, including all of their factories and, you know, and the cleaner or whatever. That's not super relevant. I tend to prioritize vegan founders because I feel that they are kind of motivated in the same way, and we're going to be kind of on the same page about some issues. And I want to be 100% sure that there's not going to be any deviation further down the line where they suddenly think, oh, well, maybe it would be a good idea. I did see that one time, and I had a big discussion with a vegan founder who was making cheese and who was thinking about a 50-50 product, so half dairy, half plant-based. And I was like, no. But I would be a little bit more concerned, and I have put that into some documentation around deals, that there can be no kind of, you know, style drift or incorporation of non-vegan products, or even any support to non-vegan products. So there was one ingredient product where we actually incorporated something in put into the convertible where the investment could be called if they were actually selling their product in such a way that it could be marketed as an improvement to an animal product. So let's say, you know, like a sort of supplement to an animal product. So, you know, a sort of, you know, lower fat dairy because they were using, you know, well, I don't want to go into the details of what it was, but I wouldn't want any of the companies I invest into having their products be used by animal exploiting industries, meat or dairy or whatever, to say we now have a better product because we are using this product, and that would then make them sell more meat-based product, if that's clear.
And I have a technical question, Claire. Since you have, as we discussed before, it's more small and mid caps companies with strong growth. Might it generate or impact the performance, undervalues the overperformance of?
Yes, I mean, but that's where the you know, the selection and the construction methodology comes into play, and actually the fact that we have performed in line with some of these other food groups, which are in potentially more defensive companies, which food ETFs, which are in potentially more defensive companies, less, you know, that haven't been taken, you know, haven't gone on this, you know, incredible roller coaster ride with the, you know, the vegan stocks, which peaked in around the time of the IPO, in fact, and then have come back very, very hard because of the increasing competition fears over the you know, the future sales. Obviously, you know, the further out the company's cash flows are, the more vulnerable they are to increasing interest rates, which is obviously something that we've seen. Increasing raw material costs, we're seeing that coming in. You know, the plant-based products are expensive; they can't be made more expensive, so that means that gross margins are being squeezed. So yes, there's been a bit of a bloodbath in the space. And I'm actually very proud of the fact that our Vegan World Index has performed, you know, broadly in line with some other more, you know, generic sort of food industry ETFs, and we have outperformed quite a bit another product which is not vegan, what I would state there is that. Being professionals in the quant space, we have tilted strongly towards growth, but due to our portfolio construction methodology, that growth tilt has not meant that we forget about portfolio construction and risk control. And so our portfolio construction is emphasizing having a high growth portfolio without high risk, so with adequate diversification, avoiding, as I said, highly volatile, illiquid stocks. You know, and I think that's obviously, you know, evidenced by the performance.
Thank you, Claire. I'm checking the chat to see if there is another question. I don't see other questions. So maybe we can, I think we have nearly come to the end of the webinar. So we are going to thank all our guests. So thank you, Claire. Thank you, David. Well, the other guests are already left, but we wish to thank everybody for accepting to be our keynote speakers today. And we wish to thank all the participants. So hopefully next year we will have another vegan finance webinar, because we think it's important to be quite strong on this topic, and hopefully things will change and people will become aware, and that's what we do hope. So thank you very much, everybody, and have a nice day or a nice evening, depending on your location. Thank you.